Hello, everybody. How is it? Yeah, the synth is nice, hey? I love how early the stream is today. I know, me too. My sleep schedule thanks me, and your guys' sleep schedule thanks you. Thanks! It's a turtleneck. You guys have never seen me in professional clothing before. Yeah, thanks for popping on, those who are trickling in. I'm going to be talking to Skylier Rain right away here, who is another streamer. If you guys have not heard of him slash her, they use both pronouns. Feel free to use it. Your TikTok link is still the old one, not so. Alright, okay. Okay. Do people want to check out my TikTok still? TikTok is a dirty place. It's full of sin. Okay. Let's, okay. I think I'm gonna chat with, Skylier. Goblins! Yes. Where's the Yeti? I still don't have it. Okay, I got one part of it. Yes, sinning. I got one part of it in, so very exciting. But not everything. Hey, hi Taken. Thanks for popping on. Hey guys. Did I manage to sort out the link? No. Did you check? Did you respond to me? Okay. Okay. Interesting. Okay. I'm eating a pear. I'm trying to like shove it down my gullet as fast as possible because I want to reduce the ASMR time. Alright, let's see what Skylier has to say. Oh! Okay.
Hello.
Hello!
Hi.
How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Do you want to chat on camera or do you just want to chat via voice? I'm good with
Uh,
whatever.
so the problem is that I'm streaming right now, and my camera's on my stream. So if
Oh.
I can't the way I could do it is I could put the camera through Discord and then have to like capture Discord through my stream. I could do that
It's totally up
if
to,
you
we
want it.
can also just do voice. Like I'm gonna have something in the background that people can look at. They can look at my
Okay,
face.
work.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
totally
sounds
okay
good.
with whatever. Why don't you
Okay, sounds
introduce
good.
yourself for my stream and then I'll do vice versa.
Amazing. Hold on. Let me pull up your chat so I can see what they're saying too. I'm not. Oh God. Gosh. Okay, we're okay. Hi. You guys can call me Skylar. I am what I like say I am a special needs behavioral specialist. So, I specialize in working with children and adolescents with what's called neurodevelopmental disorders, which is just a very long-winded, fancy way of encapsulating things like autism, ADHD, FASD, ODD, general like born at birth behavioral disorders.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's what I specialize in. I got my master's a few years ago in developmental psychology and education, and I did my undergraduate degree in psychology as well.
Okay.
And right now the majority of my work is working in schools with children like this. Um, I tend to work with very high needs typically. So typically low functioning kids with autism or kids with very bad behavioral disorders, who can tend to be violent and things like that. I have I'm curious, do you know what CPI training is? Have you heard of
CPI?
this?
No.
CPI. So it's a kind of specialized training that you have to do the kind of work I do. It stands for Nonviolent Crisis Prevention Intervention, and it's essentially like training in how to safely restrain
Okay, yeah.
like people,
Yeah, okay. We
typically
call that
children.
NVI here.
Right. So
Nonviolent intervention.
right, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
I know there's a few different ways to do like a few different regulatory bodies that do this kind of training.
Yeah.
We do CPI here in because I live in Ontario.
Okay.
Um, So most places use CPI here, but there's another one that some people use. I think it's called MVM or MLM. I can't remember. There's another one that's also used.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So
Do you
that
find that helpful? Like
the CPI training.
I found my NVI training like pretty terrible, but
No,
I've heard
no. I CPI training is incredible. Yes, I there's no way I could do my job without CPI training. Yes,
okay.
100%.
Okay.
It's incredibly helpful. Um, yeah, it's pretty much a necessity in my field that you have to know how to be able to like safely restrain a child. Because the kind of populations I work with, they'll often have like just the like again the whole issue is like emotional and behavioral regulation.
Yeah.
So they'll have like a rage or they'll have like a giant meltdown where they're trying to destroy things or attack you
Yeah.
or other people, and so you need it to be able to keep people safe and yourself.
Interesting. You must have a very unique perspective then on because when it comes to like the autism field, I'm definitely not like a
Hmm.
specialist within it. But
Hmm.
I'm more personally interested, right? Like my dad
Hmm.
has like level 1 really high functioning autism. He was a policeman for a long time and stuff like that.
Right. Hmm.
So it's more of like a personal interest. My like husband has ADHD, my brother has ADHD, so it's like more of a personal interest than something that I work in
Right.
because I work more in like the forensic settings.
Gotcha.
I'd be curious though because I once I'm okay, so I made a TikTok video talking about some interesting research around autism, and
Oh yeah.
I very much approached the video from the lens of like, um, none of this is fact. It's just some recent research that's kind of come out. Because a big issue with the
Hmm.
autism, I'm sure you can speak to this more, is that like
Hmm.
we don't really know the etiology. Like that's kind of the. And
No,
for
yeah,
those who don't
you're
know what
right.
etiology
Yeah,
means, sorry, that means like the cause of it.
lots
Um,
of it. Yeah.
and there's a bunch of really interesting theories like about neuroplasticity and stuff. So I was just kind
Yeah.
of telling people some theories, and I was very much being clear that it wasn't. And I also used functioning labels because I find nobody understands what you mean when you say level 1 to like
Yeah,
level 3.
so
Like nobody knows what that means right now.
so yeah, so there's a lot of these kind of topics where I could like drone on and on about forever.
Yeah.
I I'm very in favor of functioning labels,
Interesting.
as a professional, um, and just because it's like there's certain ways like how do I express this? The autism community is very similar to the to the deaf community in a lot of ways where like because it's this very specific disorder that doesn't necessarily like that makes your socialization different but doesn't necessarily impede like your functioning in terms of, like what you can do like task wise, right?
Mm.
it the people who have the ability to advocate for themselves in this way will often like insists on some things, which I'm like, no, we should definitely listen to these people and like definitely take what they say into consideration, but then insist on some other things where I'm like, okay, no, this is just harmful to like the field in general. And
Yeah.
trying to take away functioning labels is one of those things that I vehemently push back against.
Interesting.
I'm not I'm very in favor of like moving towards more progressive speech when it kind of makes sense. um this is not one of those areas. Like, as somebody who works in this field, right, it is vehemently obvious that like some that on the spectrum of autism that like the spectrum varies from high to low functioning. Like that's what it is, and
Yeah.
it's a very accurate way to describe in a very quick like two word way. Be like, okay, this is where this person is,
Their need
right?
level is, yeah. And what I found
Yeah,
really interesting, because a lot of these people were calling me like an ableist and stuff because of the video, which it was very
you're
much
on TikTok. You're on TikTok.
exactly right. That's like my frustration with TikTok.
Yeah.
But one thing that I found I kept like thinking in my head is I was like, you do realize like you kind of have a bit of a survivor bias. Like if you have autism and you're doing so well that you can say like I don't like functioning labels, like there's almost like a privilege to that because you're not
Yes.
talking to the
Yes.
family who has like a
Yep.
non-verbal
Yep.
child who like
100%.
oftentimes like physically assaults people in the household, right?
Yep.
And so
100%.
yeah, I mean it's not something I said because you know, I'm not gonna like tell people who are like mad at me already that basically they're privileged, but
No,
um
but it's listen, it's 100% true. That and that's the problem. And this can be the issue I find with a lot of like autism like advocacy communities that are made up of people with high functioning autism is they're really only seeing it from their perspective. And like I think how we have to approach in like a therapeutic manner
Yeah.
low functioning autism versus high functioning autism, I don't even think that they should even be studied in the same way. I think we need two
Mm.
completely different ways of looking because they are completely different kinds
Experiences.
of experiences, completely different. Um, and like the reason the autism community advocacy community is as fervent as they are, it's not without like reason, right? Like it's because they've been invalidated for many, many, many years, and a
Yeah.
lot of people will. It's very common when you have autism, especially when you're high functioning. People hear that and they assume that you must be like really incapable of doing a lot of things. It's not necessarily true, right?
Right.
Um, so I understand why why they are that way. And listen, there's a lot of things that have come out of them that I think is really helpful. I think one of the biggest things is it was the autism advocacy community that pushed back against person first language, and
Mm.
said that no, okay, like you guys came up with this because you insist that it's less offensive to us, but we're telling you it's not. And it's just something that's pretty universally agreed on by everyone with autism is that person first language is like we do like they do not prefer it.
Yeah.
Like they don't see anything wrong with being called autistic. Like it's not like it doesn't offend them in any way.
Yeah.
um
And it's like a pretty essential part of their identity a lot of the time because it
yes,
affects
yes,
every single thing that they do.
everything just even down to like the way your thought patterns are. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know if you've ever read. So I worked in a lab that worked on stigmatizing language actually. In
Mm,
my undergrad. So that wasn't my focus. I was working on incremental mindsets, but my lab partner, who was also like a good friend, we're still friends actually, worked specifically on stigmatizing language. And it's a really interesting field because there's a lot of people who basically try to like advocate for changes in language, particularly with mental health stuff,
hmm.
because they're trying to like essentially for good reasons, right? They want to reduce stigma. The
Right.
problem is that there's almost never any findings with stigmatizing language. If we change it from person first to like maybe like noun language, you might think a drunk versus somebody with a substance use disorder would reduce stigma. But what we find is that like brains work so quickly that like the schemas and the associations we attach to drunk within a minute or two we'll just shift and attach it to person with substance use disorder. Like it doesn't actually change the perception of it, it just changes the language. And often what researchers now that have called it is basically like verbal gymnastics.
Mhm.
um, so I'd be curious your thoughts on that because that was like one of my thoughts. Again, when I made this video on autism, people were like getting mad at me for person first, and I was like, first of all, shut the fuck up because I know that the autism
Yeah.
community doesn't actually prefer
No, they
person
don't.
first
Yeah.
language. And for those
So
who are
I
asking, do you want to maybe tell people what person first language
yeah,
is
sure.
and
Yeah,
the alternatives
absolutely.
so that they're kind of, I see a couple people
Yeah.
asking what that is.
So, no, I was about to say that, and I'm noticing some people ask who it is. It's totally like who the fuck would know what this means. It's fine.
Yeah.
So person first language refers to like saying instead of saying like that person's autistic, you say that like a person with autism or that person has autism, right? And the whole philosophy behind it, well, like the logic behind implementing this was that you don't want to define the person based on the disorder that they have. You don't want like to like labeling somebody as autistic. That's you're telling them what they are, right? You're saying that that is all they are, is they are autistic, and it encompasses everything about them,
Right.
right? And the reason that the autistic community pushed back against this is that one, I generally I think they found it a little patronizing, in one sense, like the kind of like, hey, we're not this sensitive, you don't have to like baby us in this way.
Yeah.
But it was also because they're like, no, that's actually a false notion. Like being autistic does impact every single aspect of my life, and
Right.
like and you're actually the one who's offending me by even implying that being autistic is something that I should be ashamed of or shouldn't want to like embrace,
Right.
right? So that's the logic behind it. Of course, when you go down further that path, like there's problems with that kind of like thinking too. Like of course, like I'm a big advocate that people with like autism, you should strive to improve your social functioning at all phases in your life,
Yep.
and most people do, right?
Yep.
But yeah, so that was kind of that was the whole debate. And I think they immediately rejected it as well because the entire push it was coming from like it was coming from um it wasn't coming from people with autism. It was coming from people who work with people with autism and people who study autism and things like that. and so I think I think just instinctually as well, they kind of had a pushback of like, okay, you don't get to dictate how we're referred to,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Which is fair enough.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Um, it was kind of funny because historically we always called it like autistic, and then we were like, no, we can't do that anymore, and they're like, no, we are fine with this. Let's just go back, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's happened
Yeah,
now.
which is
So
very
it's real
funny.
funny.
It's
Yeah.
honestly, it's kind of, it's nice because
Hmm.
I more or less agree with that. Like I've seen the stigmatizing language. I think in general, when like advocates spend a lot of energy towards any mental health disorder,
Hmm.
screaming and like getting angry about language, when I'm like,
Yeah.
what we need to be doing is changing perceptions. And the language,
Yes.
I would fucking love it if stigmatizing language, just changing language would fix it. Like that would be great.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to that. The problem is that the data doesn't bear out. It just doesn't seem to
So okay,
work. So we
so
need to figure this out in a different way.
so you asked me my opinion on that. I again, it's been because I'm not a research like I'm not, what I do isn't pertaining to research. It's been like a few years since my master's program. So I haven't seen this research, but I'd be very curious what their methodology is to studying like how like language is changing how they think of it, how they conceptualize or form a schema about something, because I it takes a long time of like after post fully modifying your language for your schema around that to change, no matter what you're talking about. So I'd be curious how that was even done. Like how would you I don't even know how you'd go about studying this concept of like how like changing like what it like yeah how are you familiar with like the methodology here?
Yeah, yeah. I actually helped her run her study a couple of times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
And there was a couple, there was like my main friend, and then I had a couple other friends that came and went from the lab who did independent studies on stigmatizing as well. And the methodology is pretty much the same. So typically what they do is they take some sort of like story that's identical, they just swap words around. So they did the one study that I helped my friend with, the language we used was kleptomaniacs versus a person with like, what did they even call it?
Person with kleptomania.
Yeah, person with like kleptomania or something like that. We also
Right.
did drunks versus person with a substance use disorder, and we did
Mm.
schizophrenia, like a schizophrenic versus a person
Hmm.
with schizophrenia. And so we gave them individual stories. So obviously the story about like drinking pertained to drinking, obviously. And it basically outlined a day in the life. We kind of talked about like some struggles that they have. We did our best to avoid any like really strong language. There's a pretty like tried and true methodology. They like the paragraphs that they wrote for this literally took them like probably 6 months to like perfect. They did a bunch of pilot studies because they really wanted to make sure that they weren't imbuing any negative emotion towards
Right.
something
Of
based
course.
on the story. I can't. I'm sure I could message her and get the story. I don't know it off the top of my head. And so basically, they had controls, right? They had some people reading the story with the person first language, and other using like noun language, more or less. And then they basically had them read the stories, and they asked them how they felt about individuals. They asked about what they would recommend. They asked
Hmm.
how they feel about drunks or people with substance use disorder. So they ask like a bunch of kind of questions, just self-reporting of more or less how they feel after the story about this individual. And what we found is basically non-significant findings overall. Like no matter what story, no matter what type. There's even my other friend did a study with schizophrenic where they did a violent story. So somebody with schizophrenia who engaged in like a violent homicide, which is just so everyone's clear, exceedingly rare. In fact, like
Yes.
forensic spaces are very rarely occupied by people who would be
Yes.
like psychotic, and they're usually NCR'd anyways,
Yeah.
which people think is a
I
let
think
off, but it's not.
I'm I I'm not sure if this data has changed, but I remember very specifically learning about this in I can't remember one of my programs, but a very shocking piece of data, I guess to most people, is that schizophrenics are no more likely than an average person to inflict violence upon somebody else. I don't know if that data has changed now, but I remember
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Usually psychotic disorders are a negative predictor of violence.
Yeah, so I guess that's changing because I remember learning that. And then I remember asking my abnormal psych teacher to clarify that, and she said, "No, that's what the data finds." I'm like, "That's really interesting."
So it really
Um,
depends if you break it down. It depends on what type
Hmm.
of delusions that they have. So if they have certain
That's
types of
fair.
like
Yeah.
violent delusions, then yes, it's absolutely a
Yeah.
predictor, a positive
Hmm.
predictor of violence. But by and large, all mental health disorders are negative predictors of violence.
Right.
Yeah, excluding
Makes
antisocial
sense.
personality disorder, obviously, for obvious
Right.
reasons. Yeah.
Right.
Um, yeah. So, anyways, that was kind of how the studies ran, and like when I'm sure you probably know this. There's a really big issue in academia in that like non-findings are rarely published. So,
Yes.
if you think that
Yeah.
something is an effective methodology and it doesn't work out, we often don't actually publish that, and so we
Yeah.
might
That's
go
not
on,
good.
and that's what happened with stigmatizing languages. People kept theorizing because it came out of sociology originally, of course, because like I don't know how you feel about sociology, but I feel like all bad science starts in sociology usually. Um,
I mean, I'm not, again, you're more familiar with research than I am, but um, it, I'm generally, like, a belief I try to hold in my head for myself all the time is that, um, I would need an inordinate amount of like proof to like invalidate or like treat another field as lesser, because I feel like that's a big mistake a lot of academics make
mhm.
when they get further into their field, is that they kind of start to think lesser of other ones.
Yeah.
Um, Again, this is one of my biggest problems with Jordan Peterson, is that he
Mm.
does this all the time. He was literally trying to like to get rid of the entire school branch of the school that I was a part of while I was doing my master's, because he was trying to say that we didn't do any good science, which is completely untrue.
For an
So
MEd for educational psychology.
yes, yes.
Mm.
So no, so yeah, I went to, I don't mind saying this. I don't like, the where I got my master's was, I got it at the University of Toronto in their school of what it's called OISE. It's, Ontario Institute for Studies in Education.
Okay.
Um, and I just so happened to be doing my program when a lot of the stuff with him was going on. So it was very close, very like
Yes.
very geographically close to me what was happening.
Yeah.
And I remember some of my professors would come into class some days and be like, and they tell us like, I actually, like, because it was just what we were talking about all the time. They're like, I actually have to go to a meeting about that after this class. Like I'm on the board for like this committee thing. We have to go and discuss this,
Yeah.
like, because he's making these challenges. So it was very, yeah, it's very very
Interesting.
personal to me.
Yeah, very interesting
Yeah,
time to kind of exist in.
yeah,
Because very few are going to have that experience, but
yeah.
yeah, I generally think that like what you're suggesting about like not looking down at other fields is definitely a broad concern. The problem is that the like more trained I get in psychology, the more dubious I am of it. Not because
That's
I
fair.
like don't believe in psychology, but because I've like been trained enough on science that I'm like, yeah, like we are a soft science. That doesn't mean that it's
Hmm.
bad. It's just like there's no way to not be, right? Unless we
Yeah.
like basically violate ethics, we can't not be a soft science. Um,
Right. I think, like, I don't know, the way I always look at psych, and the way that I explain it to other people is that, like, it's not that we can't prove things in psych. It's just a lot harder than it is in chemistry or physics, right? Like the way we generally go about quote unquote proving something is that we just have to try to look for these same, we have to replicate it across multiple different ethnicities, countries, backgrounds, ages, etc. And once we can collect all that data enough, then, like, I mean, then we can say, okay, with reasonable certainty, pretty like reasonable certainty, we can say this is true. It's just because that takes so long and so much money and so many studies, there's very few things we can say that about,
mhm.
right? Like, it's really funny, like, because I don't know if this happens to you, but it happens to me all the time. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it happens to me more often because I work in behavior. And, like, I don't know, like, a friend will come to me, and because somebody's, like being weird with them or something like that, or like somebody, like, they go into fight with somebody and they're asking like, why, well, like, tell me why did this happen, why they say this, why they do this, do you think it's because of this, do you think it's because that they have this issue and they think of this? I'm like, I mean, maybe, could be.
Yeah.
And like, what do you mean? Are you supposed to know this? And I'm like, I do know this, which is why I'm saying maybe. I can't say anything for sure, right? Like,
Yeah.
it could be that. It could also be this, right? There's many reasons that, like I think, ironically enough, trying to understand human behavior is more complicated than trying to understand, like the origin of the universe,
Right.
right? Like, it's funny enough, it's more because there's infinite facets to it. Like, as soon as we think that we've covered all influences on a person, we're going to discover more. Like, it is impossible to try to like categorize everything and try to take account for everything.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. Totally.
yeah,
And so like when I'm saying like sociology is a bad science,
yeah,
the reason why is because like in my experience working with sociologists and when I've like
hmm
spent a lot of time reading methodology, that's why. And I'm not saying that
right,
anyone who takes a sociology, right? There's like what's her name? The Australian girl, like Silly Joe or whatever her name is. I think she's
there.
Australian. She does debates. She's got a sociology degree, but like damn, she knows her shit.
That's good.
Because she's got like a minor in philosophy. I don't know if the silly serious, yes.
Mm,
And she's brilliant. So I'm not saying like anyone in the field of sociology. I would just say like overall, I would find that there's like not great statistical practice in sociology and like methodology practice, and I find a lot of times sociologists don't want to be honest about that. I don't
yeah.
dismiss the value of like theorizing and like noticing patterns in society and reporting on like people's like long like they've thought a lot about it. I don't think that that's unhelpful. I just don't think that
hmm
that's actually science, right? It's like at
hmm
that point it's like it's kind of philosophy and querying, and it's fascinating, but we can't
hmm
take it as like a scientific fact. And when it comes to person first language, that really I think was born out of sociology, basically saying like this is an effective way that we can reduce stigma. And just to be clear, there's somebody kind of talking about like uh, talking with individuals. When I'm talking with a client, I will always use whatever language that they prefer,
Yes,
right?
always.
Because
Yeah.
when we're talking about society, person first language doesn't reduce stigma at a societal level. But
hmm
if you're an individual who prefers person first language and it helps you, I always match the individual's
Yeah.
language. So if they call
Yeah.
themselves a person with autism, I will call them a person
Yeah.
with autism.
You just say it
Always.
back. Yeah.
Because you're the one being affected, right? Like, who am I to tell you what language you
Of
prefer?
course.
It's just at a societal level, we know probably advocates shouldn't be spending a lot of their efforts focusing on language. We should
Yeah.
probably find out other ways to reduce stigma, basically.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, I just
I
wanted to address that.
No, no, absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. Um, on that. Like, I'm particularly I'm very sensitive to like bad messaging when it comes to like bad advocacy when it comes to any neurodevelopmental disorder in general, because historically very small things have had massive negative impacts on my field.
Yeah.
I can tell you as someone who works in this field firsthand on the ground, we are still to this day fighting back against this idea that vaccines give you autism.
Right.
And that was all, as I'm sure you are familiar with, that was all based on one fraudulent study. And not only were the results fraudulent, but most of the people involved fraudulently their credentials as well.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and we are still dealing with that.
Right.
We're only just now getting away from the whole like Rain Man association whenever you say autism, right? Like
Mm.
for a long time, because of the movie Rain Man, everyone thought like, oh, that means like everyone with autism like has some hyperfixation that they're a genius in. And I'm
And
like,
like a
not
super
necessarily.
skill, and you're like
Yes,
sometimes.
no, very rarely.
Yeah.
We actually have we have a cute little term for people like that in our field. I don't know who would consider this appropriate or not, but it was a term that we used all the time when I was first starting out in the field. We always called people like that gifted Aspies.
Gifted Aspies.
Gifted
That,
Aspies, yeah.
and see, this is something I talk about a lot of like once you are in the mental health field, particularly like highly straining, a lot of times like these like PC stuff has to go out the window because a
Oh
lot of
my
ways
God.
that you have to
Oh
like
my God,
deal with the
absolutely.
distress of like people. Like I worked in a lock-up facility for teens who were non-voluntarily detoxing from drugs, so you can imagine how
Oh yeah.
miserable they were the entire time. And the
Oh
way
my
you
God,
like
yeah.
deal with like near like constant abuse from clients and stuff is like you do have to develop like a pretty dark sense of humor, which is
Oh
like you could
yeah.
argue whether it's bad or good, but I would say like it seems to be like actively preventative of like compassion burnout.
In
Um,
it
yeah.
the last time that I checked the data on this, I believe the average length of time that people remain in my specific line of work is 2 to 3 years. People burn out very quickly. It is not for everyone. Because you have to be ready for that. You have to it is a lot to deal with. You can end the workday crying, and you have to be able to like work through it and get past it and things
Yeah.
like that. It's really, 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 really important. I wouldn't say to like have a thick skin. I don't think that's the phrase I would use, but just to like you have to let things like just not affect you.
Yeah.
right? Like if you're dealing with a child who's screaming at you and calling you all the names that are sensitive to you, you have to realize that not because they actually believe any of those things about you. It's just because they're like completely incoherent and out of control, right? Um, and yeah, it can be a very emotionally draining. You have to really look out for like your own mental health. You have to keep a strong like check on it and make sure that you're doing okay a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess tell me what got you like into the field and like what is keeping you in it, because like you said it is easy to burn out. I mean, working with children, like I love my ODD kids, but as
Yeah.
far as like other neurodevelopmental disorders, like I really specialize in like
I love ODD
ODD and
kids.
forensic and like just like angry and trauma. Like that's kind of like
I
the area
love
I'm really
I,
passionate about. Whereas
I love working with ODD kids.
I worked with like people with developmental delay like a couple of times, and I just like
Right.
it really wasn't for me. It was like pretty obvious that like it was going to be a field that I would burn out really quickly in, which is important.
Hmm.
It's actually important to remember like you don't have to be a practitioner in every field. Like you have to
No.
figure out what clicks for you, and
Yeah.
if you really like a set of clients that people generally don't seem to like, you should work with
Mhm.
those people.
Um. So how okay. So how did I get into it? So I've been working in this field for about God, how many years? 7 or 8 years now. I started working in it when I was in the middle of my like undergraduate program. I got into it because I'm a person who has lived my whole life with autism and ADHD, and obviously very high functioning autism.
Right.
And I felt like somewhere where I have a lot of immediate empathy and understanding,
Yeah.
and I was incredibly lucky that I had the benefit of very, 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 very good parents, with nice like middle class resources to help me to cope with that. Like I was born to a mother who her degree was in early childhood education,
Oh
and
wow.
she was incredibly ahead of her time in terms of like how to like what methods to use to raise like a special needs child.
Yeah.
Um, to give you like perspective on how ahead she was, when I was first getting trained to work in my field, um, like the methodology we use changes or very rapidly because special needs as a field is very young in the grand scheme of most fields. Even in psychology, it's very young. We've only really been taking it seriously for about 30, maybe I don't even think I'd even say 40 years. I think 30 is a stretch,
Yeah.
right? And so there's a lot of very fast turnover. We're like, oh, okay, we do this and we think this is the best method, and then 5 years later, we're like, actually, no, all that was wrong. We need to do this now, right? Which is not uncommon for young fields, right? There's a lot of like, you're trying to build up the scientific base, you're trying to build up the research base. It takes
Yeah.
a long time. Um, and the methods that I was being taught when I first started training in my field, and those were very new methods, were all things that as I was being trained, I was like, holy shit, my mother did this to me. I remember her doing this to me. I remember her doing these things.
Yeah.
And I asked her about it. I was like, Mom, how'd you know? How'd you know to do these things? I'm like, you weren't trained? She's like, no, I wasn't trained to do this. I'm like, how'd you know? She's like, I don't know. I felt right. She's like, I was trained a lot of ways that didn't feel right to me, and I noticed that these things work better. And so this is just what I did. So I was very, very, very lucky. Like it to raise some like a neurodevelopmental child, especially one with like a social learning disability, you have to start very, very, very young, explicitly teaching them social skills, in order for them to be able to function on a level where they can like kind of blend and pass with other people. And I was lucky to have that base from a young age. So
Yeah.
I kind of think of it in my way is like I would be doing a disservice if I couldn't take this huge advantage that I was given and kind of use it to try to help the next generation of kids who
Hmm.
don't have that same luxury. That's kind of how I see it. And that's a thought that keeps me going a lot when it's hard, when I'm dealing with hard days in my field.
Hmm.
Um, and I also think, to be fair, you asked why I haven't burnt out yet as well.
Yeah.
Um, Again, like because I had very lucky upbringing. I score. I've never taken a test like this, but I feel like I'd scored very high in resiliency,
Mm.
and across the board. I'm a pretty tough person. I kind of grew up my whole life being the odd one out in like every sense and being bullied a lot. And I developed a really tough skin, and I also it just so happened that my first ever job in this field was in probably one of the most difficult places to work in all of Canada. In it, I don't know. Have you ever heard of a camp called Camp Winston? Have you heard of them before?
No.
Okay, so Camp Winston is a special needs summer camp in Northern Ontario, and I worked for them for 4 years, for 4 summers,
Okay.
and I believe that there's in all of North America, there's an average of like 80 special needs summer camps, and they are the
Wow.
only camp in North America that doesn't send kids home.
Okay.
And so their whole philosophy there is they take the kids who get kicked out of special needs camp.
Mhm.
So like where other camps will be like, okay, well we would take this kid because he has ADHD, but he also has autism, and we can't deal with both of those things, and we only an ADHD camp, or even things like, well, they have autism, but they also have diabetes, and we can't deal with that as well,
Yep.
right? So it's all comorbid, multiple like diagnoses, like very extreme kids.
Mm.
And that was my first job ever working this field, and it really kind of runs you through the gauntlet,
Mhm.
because it's like it was definitely the most intense place I've ever worked. It's also an incredibly supportive place. Like it is
Mm.
like I loved like the staff there. Of course, there's reasons that they can run a camp that way. It is entirely like privately funded and by like it's privately
Oh
and
wow.
like and from donations. It's a very unique situation. The woman who owns and runs the camp, is how old is Denise now? And she's like I think she's in her 60s now. But she is someone who has multiple diagnoses and grew up in a time when there was nothing for her,
Nothing. Yeah.
and she inherited a lot of trust fund money, like a lot from her father, and she just dumped all of that into this camp.
Wow.
Um, so
That's really
so
cool.
because so because of that, that they don't have to be like responsible to shareholders and like in terms of like insurance worries and things like that. Like they can afford to be able to take kids who, you know, like run the risk of maybe somebody like an employee suing because like they were injured or something like that. That
Yeah.
doesn't happen like because everyone knows what they're getting into when they work at this camp, or
Okay.
at least as much as you can. I'm not sure I say they're doing shady things, but like most other camps, like especially special needs camps, are funded by like some other big like organization that donates a lot of money, and then as a result they have to be beholden to their views and wishes on how they want it run.
Yeah.
Um so like in Canada, I don't know if this is across Canada as a whole, maybe it's just on Ontario, but like Tim Hortons camp is something that most people working special needs have heard of,
Yeah.
where like Tim Hortons like donates a lot of money to run special needs camps across Ontario. Again,
Mhm.
I don't know if it's Canada wide or not, but they can't take kids like this because they're thinking of is liability, right? So as soon as there's any inkling of violence at all, they have to send the child home. And the whole philosophy that the camp I worked at is no, we're gonna train our staff to be able to deal with these violent outbursts, which is where I first got my CPI training.
Mm.
And then because these kids live their whole lives being judged and being treated differently because of their outbursts. So they're gonna have their outbursts, we're gonna deal with it, they're gonna calm down from it, and then we're gonna move on, right? Because it's the only place where they can actually do that, right? And the impact that it has is insane. Like, um, I don't think I ever like talked to a parent who sent their child there who wasn't like who didn't think that we could walk on water, right? Like because it is the only like place that they can send their child for 2 weeks and like get a break from them because nowhere else like will take them for that long and full time. And the kids like look forward to it is like the highlight of their year every year going there because it's the only place they can go where they're treated like normally,
Mhm.
where they're not treated like we're afraid of them or something like that, right? So I think it has a very, very important impact. And it has a really good reason for being there, but it's also like I think it's very unique in what it's able to do. So that was the first place I worked. So then after that, when I moved into more like formally like right now, I work for an agency that contracts me out to like schools.
Okay.
This is like this is like oh this is nothing like that,
This
right?
is
Like
easy. Yeah.
this is easy mode, right? That's how it feels to me because I was used to like kids like picking up pieces of broken wood and trying to run around trying to stab me with it while calling me like oh I can't say it on Twitch, but like while
Bad
calling me
words.
terrible, yeah, bad words, you know what I mean? Very very unique bad insults as well. So yeah, it's like whatever.
One
Um,
question that the chat's wondering is why aren't donors to other places engage better and show them what works in that camp and replicate it?
oh, that's a very complicated question to answer. Again, because most camps like this, all special needs camps are run off of like charity like donation or some kind of like big donation, and most of them are getting most of their money from like the like nonprofit wing of some huge organization like a bank or something like in Canada like Tim Hortons or like McDonald's or something like that, right?
Hmm.
And when most of their money is coming from those places, all those places are thinking of is like,
There's only one
okay,
type of eel.
what would the headline look like if counselor stabbed to death at McDonald's camp, right? Or something like that, where McDonald's donates their money because like there wasn't proper safety procedures or whatever it is, things like that.
Yeah.
So to my knowledge, there's no other, or maybe I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's one or two, but there's no other special needs camp that is entirely funded off of like small, like over mostly like private like money and also like small donation.
Interesting.
Um, like it's very it costs ungodly amount of money to run a special needs camp like this. Also, a fact I should have mentioned before is that like one of the reasons that Camp Winston was unique and special, and one of the reasons we could take kids like this is because the ratios that we had for per counselor to kid were
Mm.
incredibly like tight. At any during when we had autism camp, which is like when we had all the low function campers come, it was 1-to-1. We were 1-to-1,
Wow.
right?
That's
All the
huge.
time.
That's
All yes,
huge.
yes. Anybody, so like when I say this, anybody who works in the field knows how extreme that is.
That's
Like we were
huge. Yeah.
1-to-1, and that is a lot of fucking money because what that means
Yeah.
is not only do you have to have one counselor per kid, you have to have more than that because at any given time, other counselors are on break,
Yeah.
right? So if when we had a cabin of 4 kids, there's 6 counselors assigned to that cabin because at any given time, 2 people are off on break.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like
Um,
one and a half
yeah,
staff per child, basically.
yes, the lowest ratios we would ever have is when we is in like boys camp and girls camp. So those were the camps for kids who were higher functioning, had other things.
Yeah.
I would say the average was like was like depending on the needs of the cabin, like the lowest ratio you would ever get was 2 counselors for 4 or 5 kids. That was the lowest you'd ever get.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, and then also there was also a contingency of like senior staff members who would just walk around the camp and check on things, and their whole job was if an emergency happens, they come running, right? Which happened quite frequently.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine it did.
Yeah. So it is a ungodly amount of money to run these places, like to staff at that level, and then consider the fact that like
Because they're
that
trained staff, correct? Like, are they all people with like
um,
at least in school for it?
yeah. So the way it worked was that most of us who were hired were all like undergrad students, usually in some kind of field like that, like psych or education or something like that. And then we had 2 weeks of training of like at the camp before kids even showed up. Um,
Okay.
and it was like 2 weeks of full, like, I don't know, we're talking like nine to like not 9 to 5, it was usually later than that, like 9 to 7, like every day, training. And that would include CPI training, and then it was all like teaching you how to like de-escalation tactics. We'd run so many drills practicing like what do you do if a child says this to you? How do you navigate a de-escalation situation? How do you negotiate a verbal contract with a child after they've had an outburst? Like how do you talk to them about how like how do we proactively prevent this from happening again? So it was very intensive training.
Yeah.
Um,
It
so
reminds me
yeah.
actually of the camp that I started at, actually.
Oh yeah.
Very different. Yours was clearly much better run. Um, it was also a nonprofit camp for at-risk children and youth, so like
Mhm.
my area of interest. So foster home, group home, homeless kind of kids.
Mhm.
Um, and we also had a policy of we don't send kids home. I mean, we
Okay.
we avoided it basically unless they
Mhm.
like left in a ambulance. We like tried their best, which
No,
like
I say
very rarely happened, but
we of course we had a few exceptions at Camp Camwitz as well. There was, I think in my 4 years there, I think a child was sent home. I want to say like 2 or 3 times.
yeah.
In the whole 4 years that I was there.
Yeah,
Because
and it's
sometimes
usually
it
for
is just
very good
so
reason.
bad you can't. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for us, we had one child who tried to we had a big zipline tower, and
Hmm.
they managed to get up the zipline tower and were threatening to jump off. We were able to
Oof.
kind of
Yeah.
tackle them,
Right.
last minute. Actually, one of our staff members tackled them, like kept the kid alive, and so then we of course called the ambulance because we have an
Right.
acutely suicidal 15-year-old.
Of
And
course.
so then we we were in the boondocks, so we were gonna meet the ambulance just to get her
Hmm.
safe quicker, and got her in the car, and in the car she started assaulting the driver, trying to get the car to drive off the
Jeez.
road. Yeah, so definitely not nearly as nicely handled. Was certainly not a one-to-one
Yeah.
ratio. Definitely understaffed, and obviously it was it's a nonprofit that didn't pay well. It was volunteer staff, so
Hmm.
it was a lot of 18, 19-year-old nice Christian kids who came out and wanted to love on kids, and had no
Yeah.
idea that I literally was chased by a kid with an axe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That does. I think one of the times that I recall a child getting sent home at Camp Winston was there was the age of kids that went to this camp were 7 to 17. Um, so it was, and typically when a child got into the camp, they would be there for the every year consistently
Oh
all the
wow.
time, and we had there's a giant wait list to get on into the camp, it's a
I
huge
imagine.
wait list. Yeah. And there's one of the teen campers who was actually, I would say the teen program is actually where the ratios were much smaller, were much wider, but again, that's because they're teenagers and they've they've worked on their skills enough that they're not nearly as in need of one-on-one. But one of the teenagers was a one-on-one, not because he was low functioning, but because he could be incredibly violent and purposeful, which is very rare when you're dealing with the kind of disorders that I deal with. 95% of the violence is very it's nonsensical, it's very in blind rage, and they calm down, it's a different state.
Hmm.
But this kid would be purposeful, and he would make very detailed threats. And one day when he was in the he was in the lake with one of his counselors, with other counselors and kids around, mind you. He picked up a zebra mussel from the bottom of the lake, and he was like a big kid, and he grabbed her arm and started sawing into her arm with the zebra mussel. Um,
Holy.
and yeah, thankfully he didn't get very far. I think she just had some pretty aggressive chafing. And I think it took three counselors to wrestle him off. And then after that they had to send him home because we differentiate very specifically between blind rage
And
violence
purposeful
and
assault.
incredibly planned purposeful assault. Yeah.
Hmm.
And that was what was dangerous about him, is that you couldn't really see it coming because he would think about it, and he would he had a very different kind of disorder. I to be honest, he probably would have been more suited to a troubled teens camp than he would there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, because yeah,
Hmm. Interesting.
yeah.
Um, would you say then overall you just had only positive experiences with Camp Winston?
In terms of working there, as being treated as a staff member, yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
Um, I know the organization has changed a lot now because they changed a lot with management and things like that in the recent few years. Um, I actually know it's just so funny. I know pretty much all the people who run it now were, ironically enough, were people who started in my first year as well. They were all first year counselors when I was first year counselors, which is very
Oh,
funny.
interesting.
Um, but again, so I don't know how. I mean, I would assume it's still a really amazing place now, but I know a lot of that. There were some errors in management, not from a from a focus on the kids level, but just from I think some of the money was just not spent in the best area sometimes. Just stupid shit like that. And I think they've shared all that up now. I don't know how much else has changed. But no, absolutely. There was a lot of support for staff, and that was another thing that the senior staff were trained in as well. Was a big part of their training was training in how to support staff. I definitely I whenever I was having trouble, or I remember once after I spent hours dealing with one of my kids who was going through this huge rage. I said, I need a break, and I walked away, and a staff member followed me, and I just started crying, and I broke down crying, and she came up to me and she hugged me, and she sat with me. So no, they were very yeah, the support there was very, 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 very good. And it was needed because a lot of people, I would say I was one of the people who had less trouble than most sort of getting through it. But it wasn't uncommon for staff members to like quit halfway through. I wouldn't say we didn't lose like half our staff, but every year there was always like a few that just couldn't cut it, no matter what people did, because no matter what or how much training you go through, it really can't prepare you fully for what you're going to experience when you work there. But I would if you want to get into special needs work at all, I would highly recommend working there because there's no better way to learn the skills, and you will be properly supported
Yeah.
as well. I would say if you're an undergraduate student right now and you want a summer job, work for Camp Winston, when you work there, it's not like you won't get paid an insane amount of money, but also because like your like room and board are covered while you're there because you live on site and you would eat like in the cafeteria. But like it's like yeah, it's a really 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 I cannot think of any better place to start your career in special needs because you will know immediately whether or not you're cut out for it.
Yeah, it's kind of like jumping in the deep end.
Yes. Yeah, but jumping in the deep end when there's a bunch of people around you like holding a life preserver for you. Yeah. So yeah.
How did they navigate a big issue I know with particularly with teens and kids and camp is managing ethics of relationship. Like a lot of times, especially at an at-risk camp where kids are often foster kids, group home kids, they come from single households, abuse, they get really attached to you. And as a counselor, especially because we weren't hiring professionals, you get attached to them. And I was always in leadership, and so trying to like train my young staff on like how to be accountable and safe around the relationships with these kids was a really big issue. Did you guys have similar issues, or was it really crystal clear?
No, it was actually incredibly crystal clear because this is another one of the things we were trained on, and this is another one of the things that having really good ratios for kids makes it really easy to deal with. Is because you have so many counselors working with such a small number of kids, assigned to such a small number of kids, is that, and we would have like, so the way it worked is that across the summer, that there were 4 sessions of like 4 different kids, groups of kids, and each session was 2 weeks. And so the kids you get an entirely new batch of kids after 2 weeks. And the way it worked is that you had 2 different like cabin meetings across each of those 2 weeks, and that's when you talk about, okay, how is this kid coming along, what goals, how are their goals coming, how is this working on, all these things like that. And one of the things that you bring up is like if you notice if a kid is getting a bit too attached to one of you, and then when you notice that, then you say, okay, like this is good, I'm glad to have this relationship with you, but we're gonna like make sure that we rotate this person in more, right? And again, we were trained on how to like, if the kid's being like, I want to go with you, I want to go with you, like, no, I'm with this person right now, you're going to go with them, you're going to have a lot of fun with them, right? So this was something like we very much monitored, like our entire job was monitoring like the psychological state of these kids. This is something that we did very well. You would of course get problems sometimes when there was some issue with a kid and be like, I will only talk to this person, right?
Yeah.
And depending on what state they're in, sometimes you just get that person because it's just, you know what, they're far too upset. We don't want something else to happen. We're gonna come get that person. But then other times you'd be like, no, you can talk to me about it. Things like that, right?
Yeah.
The thing though as well is that like this was really only a really big problem for the very new kids who were there. All the kids who had been there for a few years, I don't, it's such a like they're so used to how it runs too, right? And they know that like new counselors come in every year, right? Like there's always some that like stay, like me, who kept coming back for like 4 years. But like typically the way it worked is like after you're there for like a year, you move into like being a cabin head, and after that you move into like a senior staff role. And there's always like a lot of turnover, like year after year, right? Yeah. So the kids were so used to having like a new group of counselors that they would see, even though they all know each other, right? But they always knew we were going to treat them well because we were all trained the same way, right? Yeah. We were all very highly trained there. So the kids it was only really big issue with the really young ones who were new, because the older ones, even the ones who were slightly older, I don't know what they always felt safe and comfortable there, and they always knew that. I think they always knew that like I'm gonna like my counselors, and the next year I'm gonna have new ones, right? Like I think it was very like it was very routine for them in that way. And I think also because we very closely monitored that kind of stuff too. Um,
Mm,
of course, like you always, like somebody develops like a closer connection with one kid and another, and we don't discourage that whole thing, right? Like that's just gonna happen. That's something you have to accept too, right? Like you're just gonna bond with one kid in particular more than another or something like that. But it only really becomes problematic if the way we gauged it is if their behavior is becoming worse when you're not around, right? When you're on break or something like that. That's
right.
when we really gauge it to be a problem.
So a really common question that I think a lot of people have, and I've seen it come up in chat as well, is that a lot of people, and it was an issue we had a lot with staff at my camp, and we had a
Hmm.
very everyone seemed to have a different opinion in leadership, so it also
Hmm.
wasn't cleared up. But
Right.
a lot of times when you say we wanted to avoid over attachment and rotated staff to prevent that, a lot of people
Hmm.
see that as kind of like cold and callous. And it was a really big issue we had at
Hmm.
camp
Hmm.
where we both like, to be honest, at our camp we encouraged a certain level of like attachment, particularly for staff that returned every year,
Hmm.
because of the nature of the kids. But when I look
Sure.
back, I still look back and being like, it's not clear to me if that was actually a good decision on the leadership staff because it was a very non-clinical setting.
Right.
So it was kind of like it was made with the heartstrings. But there's this issue of like there's really good stories. Like for example, I followed the same like 8 to 9 kids for the entire 6 years that I was there.
Mm.
I basically was leadership, so I just kept building new programs for older kids so that I could just have a new
Stay with
program
them. Right.
for horses with them, so I could just stay with them.
Right.
And now I'm still in contact with them. I've gone to a bunch of their graduations. A bunch of them have
That's
gone to like
lovely.
school and graduated. I went to one of them who
Hmm.
graduated a rehab program.
Hmm.
So I've stayed really closely in contact with them. But a lot of people would argue like that's unethical, right, within this field. And luckily, especially at the time, my relationship with them was very much like a volunteer, basically like youth leader.
Right.
And so the relationship and expectations are different, but maybe explain for viewers why it's important sometimes, especially in your setting, to be managing the level of attachment kids have to you.
Because the biggest reason is that you want to be able to encourage you, like one of the biggest things with kids like this is you need to be able to foster and encourage self-reliance and independence. And
Mm-hmm.
if they're only behaving or getting better because they're around you, and or because they're motivated by you, then that means none of that progress you made is going to stick when you're not around. To me, that's the biggest reason why. Um, Honestly, like I'm sure, like as someone like who works like a lot of people when they ask this question, I think a lot of them are leaning towards like it's like an inappropriate relationship or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that can be the case too, but I honestly think that's way more rare than what it like. This is the most common issue, right? And this is what I'm always thinking about when I'm working with these populations of kids, is that
Mm-hmm.
this is the most common thing because this is step one of what will happen. And it's really much easier to get to step one than it is to get to like step four when they're trying to fall in love with you, right?
Yeah.
Like it is because you need to be able to foster and encourage independence and self-reliance. And you need to make sure that you are teaching them that like, hey, this is why we want you to do this, or this is why we don't want you to do this. There's a reason for it. It's not because I asked you to, right? It's not because I'm telling you to and I'm an adult. It's because there's actually a good reason to do that, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so to me that's the most important reason is that you want them, like the goal is to give them the skills to be able to continue to work on themselves afterwards, right? You're not trying to just like be a like idol to them and they just do whatever you say because you're their idol. That's not healthy, and that won't help them in the long run,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Like if you actually want to put the kid first, then you need to
Yes.
put the kid first, and
Yes.
like it's nice when kids get like overly attached to you.
Yeah, see, it feels great. Yeah, of
And like
course.
it's
Yeah.
a big boost to yourself, but it's not always the healthiest for the child because
Yeah.
it's something I'm really big on of like don't make promises to especially to kids that you can't
Hmm.
keep, right? And so like that's part
100%.
of why I stayed so connected to my kids because I like in I was only like 19 when I started working with them. I made them promises that, to be honest, as a professional, I'd be much more
Right.
careful about, but because I made those promises, I stuck to them, right? And I still
Right.
do. Like if my kids ever ask for help, I like help them out. I attend to them, I check in on them like
Yep.
probably once or twice a year, just like text them every now and then.
Hmm.
And not that I'm like perfect by any means, but like
Of
um
course.
I think like making promises to clients that you can't actually fulfill is like really, really damaging to kids,
Yes. 100%.
especially
And
if they're kids with attachment issues already, like a lot of kids I was
100%.
dealing with.
And this was one of the biggest things that they drilled into us. I remember at Kent Winston as well, is that they're like, do not say things that you do not mean. They said that don't make promises that you can't keep, and don't ask the question if you can't handle the answer, right?
Mm,
Which is, and what that meant is a lot of kids we're dealing with had autism, right? These kids are very literal, right?
yeah.
If you're asking a question, we teach children that asking a question implies choice, right? Implies that you have an option,
Yeah.
right? If they don't have an option, do not present it like an option. And if you fucked up at a staff member, phrase something at like as an option that wasn't, then you're like, all right, you have to like give them that option because that's how you phrase it, right? You fucked up,
Yeah.
right? You got to do that because like, which is why we're like, you're taught how to phrase things. You're taught like, instead of saying like, hey, do you want to go swimming? If it's time for swimming, they have to swim. It's like, hey, we're gonna go swimming now. Let's go.
Yeah.
Like, you say it like that instead, right?
Mm,
Right? Because as soon as you ask it like a question, what you're telling that child, and this isn't just special needs trials. I think this is children across the board. I think this is the thing that a lot of parents mess up. Is if you phrase it like a question, you're implying that that it's up to them,
yeah.
right? So if
Right.
it's not an option, don't present it that way, or else you're gonna give them like a fucked up perception
Yeah.
of how like communication works.
Yeah. Totally.
Um,
And
yeah.
it's modeling something that's not going to be helpful to them either, which is
Yep.
like a lot of these kids, especially if they have autism and stuff, communication is a skill that they actively
Yes.
need to be learning. And so if you're
Yes.
communicating poorly, it's just like, yeah.
Yep. That's a really big deal. Yeah. You have to learn to really like think about how you phrase things. And
Yeah.
as somebody who's probably, you said you worked a lot with ODD. It's incredibly
Yes.
important with ODD. Incredibly important because as soon as
What is
you
ODD? Just for everyone who's watching who doesn't know what that means.
ODD is
Maybe what is it, and then describe it, because I think there's a
no
difference between the
problem.
definition and the description.
ODD is oppositional defiant disorder. And what this means, it's very hard to describe this in a way that people don't just take as like, oh, like, so kids, the way kids are. I'm like, no, no, no. What this means is a child who is overly, incredibly defiant about everything. And when I say defiant about everything, I mean like, if it is phrased ever as a question, they will give you an automatic no. There is something, and because we still don't know it, it's very, very hard to know like what this comes from, as like you were talking about before, like with most neurodevelopmental disorders, we really don't have a clear picture of where any of it comes from, like the
Right.
exact origin.
Yeah.
But there's something with their brain that everything in their body is like telling them to defy you, right?
Yeah,
To
and
say no to
resist.
things, simply to resist everything.
Yeah.
And like, and I'm talking like, you can, and I've done this. I've worked with kids like this. You can be like, "Do you want to get some ice cream?" And they'll be like, "No." Like, even if it's something that they
Yeah.
love to do, right?
Yeah.
They'll say no. A classic ODD thing that it will never not be funny to me. It will never not be funny. It's so hilarious. Is 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 when you go like, hey, do you want to go? Do you want to go outside? You want to do this? No. And then they just go and they do it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so funny. It's never not be funny to me. Because again, it's their brain is hardwired to give that hard no.
Yeah.
So yeah. And so when this is why when you work with ODD, phrasing is so incredibly important because like, do you want to do this? And we're gonna go and we're going to go do this now can mean the difference between no and a 30-minute fight or just an easy compliance.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's not an exaggeration. Like,
My favorite story from an ODD kid is we had this kid. He was just like, he was ODD. He had a lot of abuse history. He was an angry kiddo, right? Like he was
mhm,
rough, and he was about 10, and he was big. He was a big
yep,
chunky kid, and he was fucking mean, right? Like he would just like wail on other kids. And there was another kid, so we had this kiddo, and then we had kind of one of those like cheeky kind of shit-eating grin kids who like poke but do it really subtly, so
right,
you can't catch it, especially because we had
right,
counselors who was like 2 to 10, right? So
right, of
not
course.
great splitting of staffing. And so this kid would just erupt, right? Because the skinny little kid would, and it was interesting also, like the reason I'm outlining their size is just because this like skinny little kid would just like poke and prod and pester this kid until the big kid exploded. And I'd always be
Right.
like, what is this kid doing? Because then he'd get wailed on by this huge kid. And he's like this skinny,
Yeah.
scrawny little kid, right? But he got
Nope.
something out of it because all the other kids in the cabin would laugh and they'd tease this kid, right? It
Of
was
course.
really like bad situation. So we pulled the ODD kid out a lot to give him just like one-on-one time with staff.
Yeah.
We had a program at our camp called Horses of Hope, where you
Mm.
just like take really angry kids and then you throw them on a horse and they often just like pacify like pretty quickly. It's really like
Yeah,
magical.
the research on the results of like horse like riding therapy are incredible. I want so much more research to be done in that area because therapeutic like riding it's insanely effective, insanely effective.
Yeah, well, a big
Sorry,
reason why we think is because of the bidirectional stimulation, and we put
Yep,
kids on bareback usually, so it's also warm.
yep,
And
yep,
so for a
for
lot
sure.
of kids with like high levels of trauma, especially
Hmm.
if they've been like physically abused, they're not going to be want to be touched by you.
Yep.
And so the best situation you have is to offer them like this safe creature. And a lot of times we would take in like previously abused horses and stuff like that, so they could
Yep.
relate. You'd tell the kid their story a little bit. You'd brush
I
them.
I
You get them to take care
I
of them. Super cool
I,
program.
I've heard as well therapy riding is very effective for victims of like sexual assault as well. Like I've heard that there's some therapy for like riding farms for people like for like women who have been through sexual assault as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, we use it
Yeah.
for PTSD a lot. There's the
Hmm.
hippotherapy for people with like developmental delay, and now we've been kind of branching into spaces of like using it for like basically people like wrapped up in judicial ODD kids,
Hmm.
conduct disorder, stuff like that,
Yep.
and like trauma, big time
Hmm.
trauma stuff. So, anyways, this kid. He was only mellow basically when he was with the horses, and then one time we had cookouts. It was a very outdoorsy camp, and we had a
Hmm.
cookout. They were cooking their supper together, and we had to go in. And so I wasn't there. My friend was there, but she was hanging out with the kids, and of course the skinny little kid was pestering him again, right? And
Hmm.
usually one extra staff was with the cabin because there's so many like explosions, and so the kid is just getting mad and mad, but they're doing like one of the like male counselors was getting them to like do exercise like for fun, like the kids thought it was fun. They were like
Right.
jumping around doing jumping jacks, and so this kid, this angry ODD kid goes up to the skinny kid and he just starts like jumping and punching the other kid like in the face
Oh.
and in the gut and like kicking him, and we were like, dude, like stop. And he's like, I'm just exercising, as he's like
Oh,
wailing on this kid, and we're like, no, you're definitely
I
not just
love it.
exercising, you need to chill out. And he was like screaming like, you don't want me to exercise, and we were like, not in that way, friend, not in that way.
Oh, I love those particular. Oh, I
Yeah,
think. Oh, dude, I have so many ridiculous stories like that because this is like what my job still is, right? Is working with crazy kids like this, and
yeah.
the things that have been said to me, I just like. Sometimes it's harder to not start laughing in the serious situation that than it is to like just like get over the insult. Like it's so funny. Like the things that these. I think one of my favorite phrases I ever heard come out of a kid's mouth was, and I think I can say this on Twitch, was it was you cock sucking lesbian, which doesn't even make sense. It doesn't
Holy,
even make any sense.
holy shit. Damn.
That was a
Oh
great one I
man.
heard. Oh, I love it. They're creative.
They are
Um,
creative. And you know you're in the
I
right field when you find it just like kind of endearing, where you're like,
oh
don't say things
you
like that,
have
but
to.
also like it's kind of
But
funny.
also, it's
Yeah.
so funny.
Yeah.
You have to like there's a kind of prevailing theory in my field that everybody who works in it, we just all have Stockholm syndrome. We've all just like conditioned ourselves into taking this abuse.
Yeah.
like in
Kind
our
of like
field.
definitely a little bit, right? Like
Yeah. Oh
uh,
yeah.
there's just something for me about like the ODD kids and like the really angry like mean kids that I just
Oh, I
like
love it. Me too. Yeah.
I just love them, and they
Hmm.
have like such a hard time so much
They
of the
do.
time that I really love giving them being
Yeah.
someone to them, you know, being
Oh,
one
I
person.
feel the exact same way. I love working with like really defiant kids. Because I know I like the challenge. I also just in general I like arguing with people. And like it's just like I enjoy being there for them as well because you know that nobody else like will do this with them.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody else has the patience to be able to sit through this with them. Um so no, it like this is how I so swinging back to that the question you asked me before. I think that's the most common answer I give when I explain to people like how I handle being in my field is that like it's high highs and low lows, right?
Mm,
Like
yeah.
I don't think any very few other fields that could give me the like high joy I get on certain days when you're working with a kid and they have some big breakthrough because of something that the way you phrase something, or because you really persisted with something, or like a lot of times when I'm working, because I work in schools now, and the way my job works is I'm often moved from school to school. Like I'll be at one school for like a month, or from anywhere from like 2 weeks to like maybe several months, and then I'm just moved to another one depending on where the funding gets moved to.
Yeah.
Um, and seeing them improve right before my eyes within that month, and then having the teacher come up to me and be like, "Oh my God, they're like a different child now," right? Is like that. Like I can't really get that feeling from anything, any other kind of job, I don't think.
Yeah.
But then of course there's low days as well that just suck. And like sometimes your kid's just being a piece of shit that day, and you come home from work and you're really tired and you just hate your life,
Yeah.
right?
And the
Or some,
children. Yeah.
yeah, and it happens. That's fine,
Yeah.
right? The
What
point
would
is
you
you
say
just
are
like
markers to know when to get out? Because I think like
get to
that's a
get out of
big
the field.
yeah, so like when it comes to like addiction work, when I was working with just the teens, I
Mm,
really enjoyed it, but I had to get out of my workplace because the safety stand it was a government facility, but the safety standards were horrible, right? Like there was fucking like kids pissing in vents, and so we just had like
right.
the smell of ammonia. There was like
Oof.
wires sticking out of the wall. There was literally staff assaults basically every week. My last
Mm.
day of working, I was in a hostage situation, like not a
Oh
full
God.
blown hostage, but it was like a
Mm.
situation where they were like threatening to harm themselves and physically were if I left. And
Hmm.
then when we moved them into like a padded room, because we had to have like a secure padded room in this facility,
Yep.
just for detoxing
Oh,
teens.
dude, I love. Oh,
Yeah, it was really
when I
bad. It was just a terrible workplace, like horrible. And so I got out of it for my physical safety, and I was getting
right,
bullied by like not my boss, but my boss's boss's boss, for like
right.
no. I mean, it's a complicated story. Um, but that's why I got out and I moved into women's addictions, and I did
Hmm.
that for about a year and a half, and I
Hmm.
really enjoyed it, but I just realized like I don't like working with adults in addiction. I like teens in addiction. I don't
Hmm.
love like I definitely would get burnt out with them. Like I would definitely run out of compassion for them
I
because I
would
had their
say.
kids too.
I would say the biggest marker for when you have to know if you have to get out of the field, or if you at the very least you have to take a break,
Yeah.
and like take time off, is when you come home from work and you can't let it go, and you
Mm.
can't stop thinking about it, like whatever bad that was happened, or like, because there's many times that I will get sad at work when I'm working with it, because especially dealing with, it's not even so much necessarily the low functioning kids anymore. It's actually the high functioning kids I get sad working with sometimes, because especially because I work in schools, I work in public schools.
Mm.
um when I'm saying like this child needs this, they need X, they need Y, or like they're not even diagnosed yet or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I hear that from the teacher that, oh, it's the parent, they won't do it, the parent, there's resistance to it, they don't want their child to be labeled,
Yeah.
right? Or like I'm working with a child, and their parents are going through a divorce, and they're being neglected a lot, and they're being put in the middle of their divorce, and as a result their parents can't focus on what the needs their child has. When I work with kids like that, that's generally when I get the most sad, because what I'm thinking about is, oh my God, you have so much potential. Like you could like, if you had the proper support, you could go to university, you could like do whatever the hell you wanted to do.
Yeah.
But you're not, but I don't think you're gonna get that. And if you don't get it soon, and if your parents don't fucking figure it out and like learn like to not be stupid, like you're gonna get left behind.
Yeah.
And that's the inevitability. That's when I get the saddest, when I see kids who genuinely can work themselves out, like beyond it, and I know that they're not going to get the tools long term to be able to. That's when I get really sad. But
Mm.
again, if you're still thinking about that when you walk out from the work and you're at home and it's continuing, that's when I say you need to take a break. When you can't leave it at the door. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's
Um,
huge. What do you
yeah.
think people like
Sorry.
for people who are not familiar with your field? What do you think is like a really common misconception that people have that like lay people would
Oh,
have of your field?
Um, I think the most common misconception, I would say, I think this is one of the most common ones, but just because it's the biggest annoyance I deal with,
Yeah.
is that like I'm there to like I'm there to like that we fix children, right? That someone like me is there, and like after like a month or two, I should have solved the problem, right? And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. That's not how it works, right? I'm
Right.
there to provide support and to like facilitate education and behavioral growth, and that has to be consistent. This is
Right.
not something that you can solve by just putting them in a program for a month, right?
Yeah.
This is this is long term, and like ideally, if you start young, right? If you're like let's say let's just give an example of a child, a child who has high functioning autism. Let's say they have ADHD as well, right?
Yeah.
Like me, right? Um, ideally, if they're identified young and they start getting support young, like so, like you know when like after they're in school for a couple of years, maybe they're in grade 1 or 2, right? And that support is consistent up until and then by the time that they're in high school, they don't need one-on-one support anymore, and then maybe they have some after-school programs to go to that specialize in things like that. Then eventually they will not need support. But probably by the time that they get to the last two years of high school, they don't need it. They're done with that anymore because
Right.
now you've given them the tools to be able to work on it themselves, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't do that, and like I, it is. I would say here's another misconception I can point out, and this is probably the biggest one that I think shocks people, is that the difference between the like incredibly cringy kid that you knew in high school who couldn't stop who spoke in like broken sentences,
Yeah.
and like like I suppose what the layman would say would sound like they have like a disability, right? And someone like me who, if I didn't tell you, you probably couldn't tell I have autism, and I've gone to grad school and successfully, right? Like the difference between the two of us is early intervention, right? I
Mm.
have seen kids go from like speaking or barely speaking at like 5 years old to
Yeah.
like going to university.
Yeah.
Like this can happen,
Yeah.
right? And like this is how big of a difference support makes. And none of that necessarily has to be medical, right? In fact, when you're dealing with disorders like this, with the exception of maybe of like ADHD, there's often no medication that is helpful, right? Generally.
Yes.
Um,
Like with autism, there's no medication that
yes,
works. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. With autism, yeah. As far as we know right now, yeah, there's nothing that will help.
Right.
Um, and then even for ADHD, like it depends on the kind of ADHD you have. So with some people, medication actually makes it worse. Um,
Mm.
that is rare, the kind of person that makes it worse, but like it can just not work for some people, or it takes people way too long to find the right medication
Yeah.
that suits them and things like that. Um, but yeah, I would say those are the two biggest misconceptions. I think people often see somebody who like acts disabled, let's say, or like looks very obviously disabled, and their first assumption is that they've always been that way, or that there's nothing that can be done to change them. And I will say that if you're looking at an adult, you're probably right. There's something that can be done to change at that point. But the idea that they had to be this way is absolutely not true.
Right.
Obviously, depending on what they have, right? Like when you're talking about things like Down syndrome and things like that, these are a little different, right? This is like a genetic component.
Yes.
That like while you can greatly improve their functioning, that there's going to be like an IQ difference there you just can't overcome,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So yeah,
Interesting.
these are two biggest things. And that being said, as well, I've also seen kids like degrade, for actually through no fault of anybody. Autism is a very, very, very odd,
Very
unique
odd.
ailment. I don't know. Maybe you're familiar with research on this, but I actually don't know if the research on this is out yet. Actually, one of the things that's unique and interesting about doing the kind of work I do is I see things before they would even arrive in your lab,
Right.
because like typically for most people who don't know this, I know you maybe you've explained this at some point, but the way any research is ever brought to like being done is somebody has noticed it anecdotally, right? Is that like this is something that has been noticed in the field and it's been talked about a lot, and then you're finally like, okay, we got to study this. And one of the things that when I was starting out in the field that this was how hormones and puberty affects autism. Because man, puberty, it does some wild and weird things to people with autism.
Yeah.
Very, 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 very strange. I've seen kids go from like at age 10 being like speaking full sentences like very fluidly, just looking like like high functioning, maybe Asperger's, and then post puberty they speak like in one word at a time and in broken sentences.
Yeah.
And these are kids who have full support. very odd. Um, yeah, and I don't know if you've read if any of this research is published yet or it's been completed. But yeah, this is something that needs to be looked at, and I think is being looked at right now. I think when I was in grad school, I think I knew a couple friends who were doing their like thesis research on this,
Yeah.
on parts of this phenomenon. I remember I had one friend who was studying how like the like bacteria impacts autism, which I thought was very interesting. Um, I'm sure her work is published by now. I should ask her for it, see if I can read it, because I thought that was a very interesting premise.
Yeah, I'm
But
trying
yeah,
to look up research right now while you're kind of talking about it, like recent
mhm,
research.
yeah,
And I
that's
mean, the
it.
main thing I remember learning in psychometrics around autism is we kind of just looked at several graphs of basically like functioning and treatment effects, and we saw like some kids, the moment they get certain level interventions, they just like their functionality skyrockets and they
Mhm,
just bloom and they blossom. And then by the time they're
yep,
like 13, can't even really tell. Honestly, you
yep,
could throw them in with a group of just like other peers that are their age and you wouldn't be able to
yep,
distinguish them at all.
yep,
Then you have other kids who will like do really well and then plateau and they'll kind of explode up. So you think that they're going to be like these kids
yep.
that blend and then they just plateau
They just plateau out. Yep,
and it doesn't
absolutely.
seem to get much better after that.
Mm.
It's actually why I think that the research on neuroplasticity and exploring whether like hyperplasticity, if there's like something basically like genetically going on with the plasticity system. I don't know if you've heard research
Probably.
on plasticity and autism.
Um, I definitely have. Again, it's unfortunately I don't keep up with the research as well as I should right now since postmasters. So you're gonna have to remind me of it. But I do remember reading this. I think I even cited some of it in some of the papers I wrote for my masters. But I don't remember any of it now. It was 3 years ago.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the main neuro researcher who's doing it. Let me see if I
It,
can
the
find him.
Just for the interest of you in the chat, there's a lot of things that people have anecdotally noticed about autism or weird comorbid things that have not been studied.
Yes.
One of the things that, and again, it's something that I try to talk about very carefully because people can very quickly take this the wrong way. And I don't want them to, but something that if you ask anybody who's part of these two of either of these two groups, they will confirm yes, this is I have noticed this.
Yep.
The core like there seems to be a much higher correlation with having autism and being transgender
Yes.
than there is with
Really
neurotypical people.
high. It's really,
Yeah.
really. It's like it.
Yes.
Did you see the study out of the UK with the outpatient autism clinic where it was
Oh my
80?
God.
It was like no, it
Is
was
there
a
somebody who's actually
trans
doing research on
clinic.
this? Is somebody
Yes,
who's actually? Oh
there's
my
a
God!
study that
Finally.
came out of the UK that was an outpatient. Okay, it was an outpatient trans clinic. So it was helping
Hmm.
kids who were I think it was 12 to 18 who were interested
Hmm.
in transitioning. So I think they offered about a year of
Yeah.
psychotherapy and then they started getting them
Hmm.
like talking about like other alternatives and kind of what they wanted to explore.
Hmm.
And they had an 80% autism
Hmm.
diagnosis rate at this center.
Yes.
80.
Yeah. That's
80%.
crazy high.
That's
Yeah.
higher than IBS and anxiety, which is like
Yeah.
IBS and anxiety are like being deeply kind of interconnected right now.
Hmm.
80% is fucking wild, and we don't know what to do with that. And this isn't to like,
Yeah.
and we want to be careful, right? Because I think a lot of
Yeah.
people
Absolutely.
would try to use this to dismiss
Transport experience.
trans people's
Yeah.
experiences, and that's
Yes.
not what this fucking is, right?
No, not
But
at
it
all.
means something, right? It means there is
Yes.
something going on. I don't know
The
what. As the researcher, I go, I don't know. I have no fucking idea, but it's interesting.
the biggest thing that it means for me, and this was actually so when I was applying to math, I ended up doing an MEd, even though I wanted to do an MA because I wanted to go on to do a P. And initially, I wanted to do a PhD. And one of the ideas I had for a PhD thesis was because I had noticed this, and all my friends had noticed this who worked in the field, is that I want to study this phenomenon under the basis that that if this is a high correlation, it means that we have to start studying how autistic people experience their gender experience and their transness, because that means because we have to adjust therapeutic practices built to better serve these people, right?
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
so
We have to
yeah,
even be talking about things like the basic thing of like double empathy.
yeah.
About like how like maybe you should probably explain for people what double empathy is because that's going to be more your specialty than mine.
I've actually never heard this phrase before. I've never heard the phrase double empathy.
Okay, it's pretty new. And somebody brought it to my attention in the video where everyone was screaming at me for being an ableist, and I actually did a fair bit of like research into this field more because I was like, I'm pretty sure I know these things, but everyone's so angry that maybe maybe I'm a crazy person and I'm just like
Double
actually a bad person and
empathy.
I'm like wrong about all this science. I wasn't, but somebody that was it was really interesting because I was posing the question in my comments of being like, I just don't understand why there's such this like negative reaction to what I'm talking about here because like I need it to be very clear like I said my father has autism. Like I love the autistic people in my life. I find them
Right.
so
That makes sense.
fucking refreshing because there's no implied shit with them. They just like say what they feel and
Yeah.
they don't mean anything beyond it, right? So
Yeah.
even if they say something like, "Oh, you look this way," people
Yeah.
will often say that as like a dig at you, right? And they're like often being
Right.
passive aggressive and
They're
trying
like,
to
no,
get at
I'm just
something else.
making a
They're
casual
just
observation
literally
about you.
saying that. Yeah. And it's like
Yeah.
once cuz my dad wasn't diagnosed until I was like moved out of the house and everything. Like he's not even officially diagnosed just because he's like an old white farmer cop. So that's never going to be happen, but he's
No.
like kind of
It's
like
also
he's
just like not useful at this stage, probably.
it's
Right.
not, and he's like
Yeah.
but he is working through like books on like how to be married with autism and stuff like that, so he's kind of like
Right.
self, and like every now and then he'll like say something weird and I'll be like, Dad, like that's not the appropriate thing to say right now, and he'll be like, oh haha, just my autism, right? So like he's kind of embraced it even though he's fully resistant. He's
Hmm.
also like a really fundamental Christian working in a very fundamental Christian space, so I don't know how his
Right.
workplace would react to like him getting that type of diagnosis.
Hmm.
um
So sorry, I'm reading out. Double empathy is based on the theory that a mismatch between two people can lead to faulty communication.
yes, and so
So
I was trying to
why is this
figure out.
called double empathy? This seems like an odd
It's a
phrase for.
terrible title. It's a terrible
Yeah.
fucking title. But the it's rather than it should be called like basically double like like double like empathy blindness almost, where like you
Yeah.
just can't read things well,
Right. Okay. Right. So basically, somebody's come up with a phrase for like not being able to read social cues. Right. Okay. I
Yes,
get it.
and why
Gotcha.
basically like neurotypicals versus like neurodivergents often miss each other, and how it's happening on both ends, actually, not one way
Hmm.
or the other, right? Where the like neurotypical person might hear them say like a descriptive statement about
Yes.
how they look, but they
And right.
they assume a lot of implied things with it, and then the
Hmm.
neurodivergent person is being like, why are they reacting this way? I just told them a descriptor, right? And they're like,
Right.
what the
Yeah.
fuck is going on?
So I would say this actually I can talk to at length about because I have a lot of personal experience with this and also like a lot of like educational like my whole job is teaching these kind of skills
Yeah.
to these kids. um it's okay, it can be difficult for me to explain this because like I can tell you that uh, from as far as I know, right? Based on every single, I've had a lot of autistic friends. I've lived with autism my whole life, um, and because I don't think we have research on this specific thing, but every single person with autism, no matter what their functioning level, cannot read social cues innately,
Right.
um, and that includes myself as well, right? But where I think people misunderstand is that doesn't mean that they can't read them, right? Um, the easiest thing, the way I explain this phenomenon to people, how it is to me, is about not being able to read social skills and what it's like growing up with autism. Is I want you to like imagine, because this is what my experience was like, right? Is I want you to imagine that I want you to imagine a universe where everybody is born knowing how to play guitar innately, inherently. Everyone can pick up a guitar and they can all play it. Like they know what chords are, they know what a G chord is, they know all these things. All these things come innately to them, right? And you can't do that. And you see this as, well, this is a tool. I'm supposed to be taught how to use this. Why is nobody teaching me how to use this tool? Why does someone just give me this guitar? And then you try to strum it and you hit a sour note and everyone looks at you like, what's wrong with you? Why does your guitar sound bad? What are you doing wrong? And it's like, I don't know. You haven't taught me how to play this fucking guitar. And it's like, why would I have to teach you? You just know how to do it,
Right.
right? Like that's what understanding social cues is like.
Yes.
It is baffling when you're younger, as a younger high functioning person with autism. It's baffling to you that people are getting so indignant with you that you don't understand this, because to you this is a skill that you have to learn, and it's a skill that you're struggling to learn, and it's also a skill that everyone, while you're trying to learn, is berating you for not knowing. right?
Yeah.
Um, and they don't even understand how to teach it to you because it comes innately to them. So imagine trying to teach something that you've never thought about how you learned it, right? Um, at this point in my life, I read social cues. Honestly, at some points, I think better than the average person, but it's because it is a skill that I've had to very consciously learn. And the way, like, when I'm in a social situation with someone, there's a constant stream in my head of like when I notice that their facial muscles change, when I notice them shift position, when I notice when their eyes are moving, all these things, a very conscious process that I do to be able to know how the conversation is going, whether or not they're still interested, whether or not I'm talking too much, etc. All of these things, right? It's a very conscious process that I have to go through,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this is the case for most high functioning people. Is this, you just have to learn, and we learn, and this is how you cope in mass, right? Or what? Wait, oh, I should probably explain the term masking for people.
Yes,
Um,
definitely do that.
right. So masking is a term that I don't think it's unique to neurodivergent people. I think it's used in other contexts as well. But essentially, what it means is you are hiding your odd divergent behavior. And you're specifically not doing things that make you that like look odd and look out of place, because you know that they will make you look out of place, and like all the little autistic things that you want to do, or like whatever it is, like it's a fancier way of, and a more complicated way of just saying coping,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like you're putting on a mask, you're hiding like what is really happening in your brain, because you know that that's not the way to do things,
Yeah.
the way people expect you to do things.
Yeah.
um, Ironically enough, one of the hardest things about being someone who's high function with autism is that people often don't believe how difficult it is for you, because you get to a point where you mask so well that when you tell people that you have autism, they don't believe you, right? Or that they severely undervalue how difficult it can be.
Right.
They underestimate because you're just masking, right? And they've never known. Um, so like so that's where was I? I just went on tangent. Now I can't remember where I started. What was I initially talking about?
Masking. Oh, why were you talking about masking? That was the connection. Does anybody in chat
Um,
remember?
Chat, help us out. Oh, social cues. Thank you.
Yes.
Like how so. And again, I was incredibly lucky. I had a mother who recognized that this was an issue in me, and explicitly, I still remember her explicitly teaching me how to respond to different social situations. I remember having to stand with her out like what we when we go over to like a neighbor's house or a friend's house. She'd stop right in front of the door, and she'd be like, okay, when they answer the door, what are you gonna say to them? I'm gonna say hello and thank you for having me. Okay, what are you not gonna mention? I'm not gonna say that it looks like that they look fat. I'm not gonna say that their house looks messy, or that there's things everywhere. And she's like, that's right, you're not gonna say it, right. She had to like, because again, to me these are just observations, right?
Yeah.
And she would explain why like they're not like why they're not appropriate to say, and all these things like that. Um, but yeah, but again, it's something that I, even as an incredibly high functioning person who's mostly has social situations down, there just comes a certain point where you just have to accept that like you will never, like there's always something that you have to be adding to this massive math equation in your head. And listen, I'm 28 years old, and something I just learned recently, very recently, because I had a fight with a friend about this, and he explained it to me, and I was like, okay, I just learned a new social skill today. Was we had this fight because he had mentioned something to me. Like he was a friend that I live with. He was one of my roommates, and we had a fight because he had mentioned months ago that there was a certain little thing I did that or in the bathroom or something, that where like I didn't put I didn't put the toilet paper facing the right way, and how it irritates him, but it's like a little pet peeve, and it's not that big of a deal, right? And to me, what that means is, okay, so I don't have to be conscious of this, right? And we got into a fight months later because he said like, why do you still do this? And I'm like, you said it wasn't that big of a deal. And it's like, yeah, but like now that you, even though I say that, now that you know that, like if you continue to do it, then the only reason like why would you do it if you know that it bothers me? And I was like, oh, okay, so I understand that now, right? Like now that's another social skill that I learned. I didn't know that when people bring that their like pet peeves to you, when they just mention it in passing. If you continue to feed, if you're not conscious of that have a pet peeve, they don't like that, right? It bothers them because to them, you should like just innately remember, like, okay, I know that will slightly irritate them, so I have to make a conscious effort not to do that. And even people say that's not that big of a deal, it becomes a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure is a thing that most people in here just inherently knew, right? And you've been bitched out at people before for doing something like that, and like it makes sense to you. But that was just a new skill that I learned just not a few months ago, like at the age of like 28, right? Because again, when it's a skill you have to learn, like you can't. It's hard to extrapolate to every different situation. You can't learn without making the mistake, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
I think one thing that's like really interesting in all of this as I'm thinking about this is when I was trying to talk with the people who were like really angry at me on TikTok, which is like going to be my main base of going back to, because I was
yeah.
really really upset by this actually. I was like so frustrated. Because I was trying to basically communicate with people. So, okay, there's a couple of ideas that might be worth talking about, which is there was a lot of people who I think so I'm curious about individuals who get diagnosed with autism as adults. Now, this isn't to say that
Hmm.
I don't believe in their diagnosis. What I'm saying
Right.
is there's something interesting going on that it was missed this entire time. Now, it could be parental negligence because, like you said, there are absolutely parents who just refuse to get their kid tested because they don't want to
Yeah.
get slammed with the label, right? So that shit for sure happens. But the
Hmm.
amount of like diagnoses that I am seeing, and in fairness, I don't know to what extent it is self-diagnosis.
Hmm.
Is interesting, and somebody in the chat brought this up as well. It's what made me thought of it. Is it seems like there are individuals who can express certain symptoms that are similar to autism, like really struggling to read social cues that
A lot
probably
of
aren't
yeah.
diagnosable. But I kind of go like, is there a separate diagnosis that we might need to make for something like this?
Hmm.
I'd be curious
Um,
your thoughts.
that's a really big choice. Sorry, before I get on that, I want to answer a question somebody asked in the chat because I
Sure.
thought it was a good question. They asked, "Does masking feel resistive, inhibitive, active, or something else?" Um, Masking, I will say, it no longer feels as active because I am so trained to do it that it is automatic to me. Um, it's automatic. Like I don't think about doing it anymore, even though there is a constant running train of thought in my head about it. Um, I would say the easiest way to say is that it's tiring. Like a normal social interaction or a normal day of socializing for the average person is more it's more draining for me because I have to be masking the whole time.
Yeah.
Like and again, because I'm 28 now and I have a lot of like coping mechanisms. Like if I'll do a lot of things. Like if I know that like I'm going to a convention like next weekend, right?
Hmm.
I'll be like, okay, so I'm going to convention. I'm going to be super socialized the whole time. I have to recharge my battery. So this weekend, I'm not going to see anybody. I'm going to spend all my time in my room alone. Thanks for following. I
Yeah.
saw that.
Yeah. No worries.
Thanks.
I'm gonna bump you in
Um,
the chat while you're chatting. So.
uh, like it's right. I'll spend a lot of time alone. I'll do the things that I need to do to charge those batteries up and to make sure that I'm ready and not so I don't get overwhelmed when I'm there because even though I'm incredibly high functioning, I haven't had a meltdown since I was like a child, right? But the capacity is still there.
Yeah.
And the only reason it hasn't happened as an adult is because I manage myself so well. And I have gotten close before. And like I've had to have like I remember there was a situation a while. Oh my god, thank you guys for following by the way. I'm afraid that everyone's following you now.
Good.
I remember remember a situation I had recently. It was about a few months ago. Was I had just like I was helping a friend run like a big like a rave event. And I was like socializing all day like in the sun like on the beach. It was great, like a lot of fun. I
Thanks,
was like dancing.
Socrates. Sorry, I just
I
got
was
rated.
oh no problem. Like I was dancing. It was a lot of fun, things like that. And I had anticipated. Again, this nerd goes back to like planning and being prepared, right? As an autistic person, right?
Yeah.
Like they're like, okay, like I'd gone a ride there with my friend who was running the event, and I was helping him like set everything up and things like that. And my assumption was after the event was done, we were gonna drive home, and then I was gonna be it, and I was able to be alone. And then as the event was ending, all of my friends, including the one who I was my ride, started playing like, oh, we're gonna go, like a bunch of us, like 25 of us, we're gonna go we're gonna go out and get Chinese food now. We're gonna go out, we're have a big dinner, right? And it's very clear he wanted to go as well. But I started panicking. I started like and what happens when I realize that I'm having my social batteries is drained is that I start the math starts falling and I start getting like more autistic is like the best way to say it. Like things that would normally be fine for me are suddenly a huge issue. Like walking through crowds and hearing people. Like I'm now having sensory sensitivity, which I usually never have because
Mm.
I'm getting overwhelmed. And when we finally, and I was on the verge of having like a panic attack because I was anticipating like, oh my god, I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm gonna like, if I have to sit in that restaurant, I'm gonna scream. I'm gonna
Yeah.
scream it. Like I'm just gonna have a meltdown. And so when I was in the car with him, I was like, I have to think of a solution. I have to think of a solution to this. What I said to him, I was like, you know, I was like, I just have to be honest with him. He's my friend. Hopefully he'll understand. I was like, I'm feeling very, very overwhelmed right now. I can't do like a big dinner with a bunch of people. Like, can I sit in the car alone and just wait? Like, just park it on a side street, wherever. And I'm like, please. And I stress him, like, you do not have to rush on my behalf. I'll be very happy and content sitting alone in this car. Um, and like I just like and I'll wait. Like I don't want you to rush. I don't want anything like that. I just need to be alone. And he was like, like, no, I totally understand. That's fine. I was like, he was like, I'll leave the keys with you. Decide you want to come in. Like just come bring me the keys and whatever. Like you'll be fine. And that's what I did. Right? Is that like a big part of managing my autism is knowing when like okay, this is too much. I can't do this.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's totally been times when a friend's inviting me to a thing that I normally want to go to that I had to be like, no, I can't do that. I just did these three things. I can't, right? Like I'm not gonna go, because I know it'll be too much for me, um, right? And that's basically how I kind of manage myself, um, right? I especially I like to keep a close lid on and handling myself because I don't personally want to reveal to like all my friends all the time that I'm overwhelmed, right? Like I like to have myself well managed so that they don't like it's a very personal thing. It's very personal.
Yeah.
Like admitting to somebody that I'm about to have a meltdown if I can't get alone or something like that, right? Because I'm an adult, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, but again, thankfully those things happen very rarely now because I'm so used to how much I can handle and what I can deal with, right? Um, sorry. Okay, to get back to the question before, we were talking about self-diagnosis and the advent of diagnosing adult people with autism.
Yeah, well, I'm curious on your thoughts about it, right? Because we have this issue
I
where
have a
we're
lot.
seeing an influx of adults being claiming that they're diagnosed, and like this isn't me saying like they were or weren't, but when I like talk to them about it, like I know I as a psychometrician, I know a
Hmm.
lot about diagnosis, and I'm not
Of
trained
course.
on the ADOS because the ADOS, so I took a full year as a
Hmm.
psychometrician to get trained, and I
Hmm.
still would need to do basically another extra intensive course on just the ADOS alone to
Right.
administer it. So I'm not trained in the ADOS. I just understand that it's an extremely like long testing
Yes, it is.
regiment. And so a
Yes.
lot of people talk about getting this diagnosis, and I know that there's absolutely issues. People bring up like the privilege of a diagnosis because it costs a lot of money. In Canada, it doesn't cost; it's just the wait lists are really long and stuff like
Hmm.
that. That I think is really legitimate. But I'm really concerned about people like self-diagnosing as autism specifically because I recognize that there are so many disorders that can look like it that aren't, right? We've got like ADHD that can often create some similar symptoms. And I guess as somebody who's like has like legitimately diagnosed family
So
members
okay.
and friends with autism,
Yeah.
I don't know how to make heads or tails of it because I don't want to be a dick, you know?
No, of course. And believe me, this is a thing that I think of and I argue about a lot. And I'm pretty sure you talked about this with Destiny as well, because it's something that he talks about too. Um, I'm pretty in line with I think what he believes on it because I tend to agree. I think I'm not in favor at all of self-diagnosis. I think one of the biggest downsides that have come as a result of making this positive mental health culture, not to say that I think it's not worth it. I would much rather live in this world than the world we were living in before, where we told everyone to repress everything.
Yeah.
Um, is this advent of people thinking that that just slapping labels on themselves and victimizing themselves in this way and a problem that I noticed as well. I noticed across my career. I've noticed it with my friends. I even noticed it with myself happening too when I was when I was dating when I had a girlfriend who had autism. We dated for a year and a half. Is that um uh taking that on within yourself and defining yourself by your struggle instead of by how you solve the struggle, which is often how people who self-diagnose use it as, um, you will placebo affect yourself. You will give yourself problems. You will
Yes.
give yourself way more issues than you have. So on the negative side of it, and with the side where I disagree, and where I'm worried, that's what I say. And I don't support the idea of self-diagnosis. I think you need to go and get a diagnosis. I understand that there's problems of access, especially in places like the States, because they're insane and they don't think healthcare is important.
Yeah.
Um, right? But like I really, 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 really encourage people to get diagnosed. And I think the best thing that we can do as mental health professionals is just like not necessarily like tell these people that they're wrong, but just like explain like what goes into a actual formal diagnosis,
Well, a lot of
right?
mental
And
health practitioners don't know. Like, I've heard this shit
yeah,
from mental health practitioners being like,
oh dear
diagnosis
God,
is super easy. Anyone could
oh my God,
diagnose almost
no,
anything if they
no,
just like took a training for 6 weeks. And I'm like,
not true at all,
no. Like, as
not
somebody
true at
who's
all.
taken, I intentionally took my post grad before my graduate study in clinical psychology because every clinical psychologist I've worked with has been like, I am absolutely undertrained and underprepared for diagnosis
Yeah,
as somebody with a PhD in clinical psychology. That's why I took psychometry, was so that I would
right,
have that already. I wouldn't have to worry about it when I leave,
right,
right? Yeah, it's a huge pet peeve of mine. I think it's really, really
right.
just
So
like shows to me that you don't fucking know what you're talking about if you think that
no,
diagnosis is
100%.
easy.
So that's why I say on that side of it. On the other side of it, especially when you're talking about people getting diagnosed as adults, um, I'll use my personal experience as like sort of like a perfect example of this. I'm actually not formally diagnosed with autism. I'm
Mm,
formally diagnosed with ADHD. And that's because when I was diagnosed as a child, I think my first diagnosis when I was like 5 years old, right? 'Cause my mother recognized very young that something was wrong. They diagnosed me with ADHD, and I've read it. I've read my old assessment, but it also says on it he has ADHD, but he also can't read body language or facial expressions and has a lot of time trouble with social functioning, but it doesn't really fit into these other categories. And because when I was a child, that's when we were back on the DSM-4,
right.
when we did not have autism spectrum disorder, and it was either you have autism, which means you're incredibly low functioning and like you can't speak, or you have Asperger's, which
Asperger's.
had a very specific diagnostic criteria.
Yeah.
So looking at that and knowing the problems I've had throughout my life, especially when it said on my initial assessment that's what it was, that would be classified under autism spectrum disorder these days in DSM-5, like 100%. Like
Mm,
saying I can't read body language or social cues, I have a lot of trouble with like communication, things like that, but like we can't put it in either one of these categories. These days would fall under autism spectrum disorder. I'm just very high functioning, right? Like um which is why like that's why I say it now. So in terms of like adults getting diagnosed now, I can imagine that I'm pretty there's a lot of people like me who fell through the cracks when we were on the DSM-4 in that way. I believe that that's one of the biggest reasons why everything was moved to a lot of things were moved to a spectrum when we went to the DSM-5 is because there were so many people getting diagnosed with, oh God, what was it? It was some long-winded name like non-specific developmental disorder not otherwise specified, or it was something along those lines,
yeah.
right? Which is basically this is the category we put everybody into who has like little bits and pieces of all these other things, but we can't really, we don't know, right? It's not really a helpful diagnosis,
Yeah.
right? And that's why we don't do that anymore.
I just want to address one person posed a question about CPTSD and autism. On my end, I'll just address
Oh,
CPTSD is not.
remind me what that stands for again.
Yeah, it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So just so
Ah,
everyone's clear, that is not technically a diagnosis in any mental health manual. So it's not a
mm-hmm.
diagnosis in the DSM-5 or in the ICD-10. It is being bandied around right now in research as a potential diagnosis because there's obviously something that happens when kids experience traumatic trauma, particularly if they have chronic trauma, like an abusive parent through their life, and it creates really unique sets of behavioral and coping dysfunctions basically when they're in their adulthood. The problem with calling it CPTSD in my mind is that a lot of times the symptoms and effects of childhood trauma on people isn't very akin to PTSD. It's actually more akin to like it's got some elements of like attachment disorders. It's
Mm-hmm.
got some elements of like social anxiety. Like it seems to be a really modge podge sequelae of effects. And so I think if we use the term CPTSD, the idea of like we need to probably get a diagnostic label for people who have like complex childhood trauma. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think CPTSD though
we
is going to
do.
be
Yeah.
really confusing for people because then they're going to think it's PTSD, and I don't actually think that the treatment between these two things are the same. I think PTSD has a very
Yes.
specific treatment because it's
Yes.
usually isolated around a single event or a number of single events that are causing trigger flashbacks. Whereas childhood trauma, it's usually not just one event, it's the fact that your entire childhood was kind of fucking robbed from you a little bit. And you have a lot of behavior problems and a lot of
I would.
coping and psychological and processing struggles as a
Yes.
result of this. And the treatment of it is so much more intensive and so much more complex. So,
I speaking as someone who has worked with populations of kids like this, I would absolutely agree. It's not the same as PTSD. It's far worse, unfortunately. Um, I think this is something that people really like. I don't think you can really overstate the damage enough that like early childhood trauma does to somebody like forever. Um, like like damaging somebody's understanding of things like intimacy, what proper intimacy is, or proper empathy, and like and what a healthy relationship looks like when they're so young, really, really, really does some intense damage. When you're young, you're still forming those like core memories and those core. When your personality is still developing,
yeah.
you are so much more sensitive to just wide like just like damage to your psyche,
Yeah.
unfortunately, and it really really alters and affects like how what kind of adult you turn into. um and unfortunately, one of the hardest things about, and again, I've worked with quite a few of these kids because especially the camp, because again, unfortunately, there's a lot of comorbidity between abuse and things like autism and ADHD. Not because the abuse causes these things, but unfortunately the other way around.
Right.
A lot of the time. Um,
Meaning,
especially,
just so that people are understanding, meaning that when children are ADHD or autistic, it can increase the likelihood that abuse happens to them
yes,
because
yes.
they're more difficult children to raise.
They're either more difficult children or in a more fucked up way. If you have a nonverbal kid who can't tell anybody what happened to them, it's a much better target for a terrible person as
Yeah.
well. Um, yeah, so things like that as well. Things that we don't want to dwell on in the stream right now
Yeah.
and talk about. But yeah, it the hardest thing about working with kids like this is what their behavior is going to look like and what kind of person they're going to turn, like how this is going to like affect them. You do not know in like until they go through all their other developmental milestones.
Yes.
It's quite common that kids who have been severely traumatized as young children can be perfectly fine children, and when they hit puberty they turn into just the terrible, like all like just like really like fucked up, antisocial like personality disorder kind of like behavior.
Which,
um
interestingly, somebody linked me an article when we were talking about like why is it the case, and I was thinking about it more. Where like it's really weird that like in puberty it seems like autism, like the
wait
individual symptoms just explode all over the place. And
wait
then I was thinking about
I
it.
have a theory. I have a theory about this. Can I wait before you say? I want to say mine
Yeah,
before
say
I.
your theory because I
Okay.
found research. So I didn't find
Okay.
research. Somebody in
I'm
the
I'm
chat found some interesting
I'm
research.
excited to hear the research because this was always my theory on it. Was the brain and the psyche are shockingly good at like protecting itself and things that you can't handle. And when you are a young child, there's just you are just not capable of processing certain levels of trauma. Like you just can't do it. Like you can't fully grasp it.
Yeah.
And when you're going through the biggest amount of development, especially mentally, is when you hit puberty. And as you grow into somebody like more capable of more complex processing, these things start coming up and you start grasping like these realities of what have happened to you really start hitting you. And that's when it really fucks up your psyche because you're starting to understand like and your brain is starting to be able to actively process like all these terrible lessons that you learned from your abuse, right? Because that's really the big problem with abuse is that it teaches you bad lessons. It teaches you bad lessons about what intimacy looks like, what relationships look like,
Yeah.
what like love looks like, all these things, right? So these things kind of like explode into your brain as you hit puberty, and then you're just dealing with it and starting to process it as you go through this, and it's just not a good combination.
Right. And here's the thing is that probably you know this as well. A lot of
Hmm.
psychiatric disorders, their age of onset is typically around like the age of like 14 to
Yep.
like 19. It's almost
Yep.
always during development that we see
Yeah.
these disorders occur, right? PTSD is different because PTSD is very much linked to a
Of course.
traumatic event. So that seems to be a bit different where there's kind of a
Hmm.
failure in the memory processing system with PTSD.
Hmm.
But found a really fascinating article that
I'm
shows that
excited.
there is, if you look at my screen, it's
I
very
am. Yeah.
excited,
Hmm.
neocortical reelin promoter. So this is just a promoter of methylation on the
Hmm.
gene expression. Methylation is really important for basically like epigenetic expression. So it's in a really simplified way. Maybe somebody else can explain it better than me. Let me see if I can look something up before I try to like bastardize explaining it. Um, yeah, this isn't really. Think of methylation as like little dials that get added. So you have a gene, like a
Hmm.
little code that is going to code for some protein. But then around that protein, the code for the protein, there's a bunch of basically what we used to call garbage DNA. And it turns out garbage DNA isn't garbage. Evolution is a little bit smarter than that. And in fact, that garbage DNA is basically dials, and it modifies the gene around it. So it maybe
Wait.
tells
So
it to be
is
louder or
this
quieter. This is epigenetics.
no? So no. I was gonna say. So is this study showing that there's actually like a biological implication to trauma?
Not trauma, just puberty and
Interesting.
how
Oh, and then how
basically.
these things get coded.
So I
Right.
suppose trauma would affect this, right? Like,
Right.
reasonably, if you have something that disrupts the methylation process, you are going to have certain genes that are expressing too loudly or too quietly or not at all based on the
Right. So sorry.
methylation process.
So this is what I was trying to ask is, does going through the childhood abuse affect this methylation process? Is that what this is showing?
It shows that basically while you're in puberty, there is a massive amount of methylation that occurs in your brain.
Hmm.
So
Right.
like pubescence is a very critical time for basically epigenetic
Hmm.
modification of your brain's DNA,
Hmm.
which basically means that if you have some epigenetic markers for some sort of disorder, and then there are stressors that have happened in your life that disrupt your methylation,
Hmm.
this could be, and this, I'm just reading this article, so like definitely like take everything I'm saying with a big grain of salt, because I might
Yeah,
like
for
read
sure.
through and be like, oh, I'm fucking wrong about everything. But that's my understanding of methylation.
Hmm.
And when we're looking at this is basically just showing that pre-puberty versus post-puberty kids are having more methylation in the brain. And so basically it's going to change the genetic expression of your brain cells, which really matters because we know that there are
That's
lots
crazy.
of neurological, like rare neurological disorders that can be epigenetically triggered, like chronic pain.
Hmm.
In some cases, is an epigenetic triggering of glial cells, where basically like the trauma stresses out your glial cell, which is you have for those in chat, you have neurons, which are
Hmm.
like this hot, sexy cell. That's the brain cell. That's what everyone thinks of. But then around every neuron is a whole bunch of glial cells, which are kind of like supporters. They're kind of like minions in League. Like you kind of forget about them, but they're actually really, really critical. Um, and so they kind of come around your neurons and they support it. But it seems to be the case that when a neuron is kind of freaking out because it's been damaged, the glial cells around it release a bunch of chemicals basically to be like, panic, we're in pain, heal the cell. But there's some sort of weird, in people who develop chronic pain, a weird epigenetic thing happens with the methylation probably. Epigenetics is more than just methylation, but I'm not as expert in it, so it's going to be one of those things I'm like, I understand it enough to understand it. I don't know if I understand it enough to explain it easily and like simply for people.
I would say, yeah, a lot of this is very beyond me. I'm in no way specialized in like neuropsych. That's not something that I
So
do.
yeah, basically think if you in genes, you've got like these switches and dials that can be played with by the environment. Basically, that's what in a really simplified way, methylation is. If you have an environmental trigger that maybe switches off a gene, now that gene isn't going to be expressing anymore. Not because you don't have the genetic makeup for it, but because an environmental trigger has turned it off, or a dial, it's turned it down, so it's expressing less than it should. And so if you have a whole bunch of genes that are expressing differently than maybe they would in a more healthy, less stressed out brain, it makes sense that you might develop things like mental health problems.
Interesting.
I don't know if that just made me lose everyone. It's really exciting.
Say,
I'll read the article later.
This is very like intense. Like, I think like genetic and neurochemistry research, which I think goes above. It's even going over my head a little bit, and I have some knowledge of this because I had to take some. You have to take some neuropsych in undergrad, right? But like, yeah, this is I would have to read this a few times to be able to fully grasp this.
Yeah, maybe a better way is like think about your genes like a piece of music. You probably understand what a piece of music is,
yes,
right?
Of course.
And so you have the notes, and that's like the normal genes that we think of. But then around the notes, I don't know if you guys have ever seen like a script out here. I'll see if I can find like a music sheet. Around the notes, there's going to be these little like notations of like things like crescendo here, or there might be a line to tell you to like don't like so this line here, if you're a musician, tells you not to be like da 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 da, but it tells you to like hold and change through the notes smoothly, right?
Yeah.
Epigenetics are like these lines that are saying like smooth it out or get louder. So they absolutely modify what the genes, what the music expression looks like, but it doesn't change the core notes.
I love that Jacobs in chat is like, I've been lost since the beginning. Giga Chad. Owning it. I love it.
I'm trying. Does the music score make sense?
I think that metaphor makes it make a little bit more sense. As I'm sure you know, genetics is just one of those things kind of like, I don't know, like theoretical physics that you can dumb it down as much as you want. It'll still be confusing, I think, to most people.
That's fair.
Listen, I've forgotten most of my neuropsych stuff because it's just not what I deal with.
Yeah.
So it's my
it's my like private passion. I explained it very well. Nice. Somebody in the chat was like, I get this shit. So
I think you did a good job. I think you're just trying to explain something that is inherently incredibly complicated.
It is. It's like trying to explain to people IQ statistics or anything about statistics.
Yeah.
And it's just like they're like, well, that means like 1 out of 100, and I'm like, kind of.
No.
And they're like, well, what do you mean kind of?
I'm sure, like, I don't know how much of Destiny's content you've watched, or like, I can't remember if you guys talked about this when you talked to him, but I'm sure he's mentioned that, like when he was debating right-wingers, like, 90% of his debates was just arguing about the basic understanding of statistics.
Yes.
Because people don't understand how to read stats at all.
Literally, it's to the point where, like, when people don't understand stats and I'm trying to explain it and then they don't understand it, I'm like,
oh my god, I know.
I must be wrong, right? Because I'm not expert enough to explain this. So in my head, as a teacher in nature, I'm like, if I can't explain this, I must be wrong. Like, I must be missing something. So I've been, like, on the side while I'm, like, prepping for all these talks. I've been fucking listening to like Khan Academy, going through statistics again to be like, I swear I know this stuff.
So actually, I want to ask you about this. I saw last night. I didn't watch it because it was a bit late at night for me, and I wake up at like 7 a.m. to go to work.
And it was an aggressive panel that just like assaults your ears with people screaming.
I wanted to ask you how was your experience on Anya? Was that your first like big panel show?
No, I've done Prime Case 3 times. So I've done 2 opens with him, and then I got invited to a private chat where I actually had a debate where I was alongside Destiny, which was an extremely exciting experience because he sided with me, which just that means you're right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
It's about agitators and activists, which is weird.
That's a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's been very intimidating because I've been like pulled into a lot of like political debates, and it's like I'm a layperson in politics. Like sure. I sometimes don't even pay attention to politics for like months on end because I just like get fed up with media mostly. And so like yeah, so I prepped a lot for the Prime one. For the private panel, just because I like knew I was going into an area that is definitely not like if people want to debate me about psychology, I don't need to prep. I just fucking know it, right? Like I can just whip it out. Yeah. But if you want to debate me about like whether agitators or activists are like a good idea, well, right, I need to like spend a lot of time being like, okay, let's clarify what the word agitator is and what an activist is, and what are good examples of both of these, and what are like common examples and what are bad examples, right? So it was super fun, but. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it then. Yeah, I've like I would definitely enjoy doing a panel like that just because I love fighting with people. But like man, I will say as an experience watching them, I've the only time I can ever like watch or listen to one of those like panels that Destiny's on when it's like 9 people is if I'm like playing League of Legends and it's like just background noise to me because
Mm,
actually trying to pay attention there's no substance there.
no.
There's no sub. It's just people yelling and trying to push their agendas out and just screaming over each other. And it's like so to actually like listen to it in terms of like a fruitful conversation, it's not what it's there for, right?
Not often.
Like
Every
I
now and
I
then,
I
but
I think if you want to have a panel that like actually like you have like decent conversation, I think the max number you can do is like 4, maybe 5. I think anything above that it just turns into a shit show.
and you really have to select
Honestly,
who you're bringing on. Like the reality is like
yes.
not all debaters are made equal. And this is
No.
coming from somebody like I'm a baby debater, so I'm not even saying like I'm the best debater and I should be on the panels. Like I probably shouldn't be, right? And like I get it, you don't want to just hear the same 4 people on Twitch arguing about the same things, but
Yeah.
the reality is like there's some really strong debaters. Like last night on the debate, there was a guy named Spoons who's an
Hmm.
excellent debater. Although he's very cheeky because he definitely like will take positions on a public stream that he doesn't actually believe, which is very annoying.
Oh, I hate people like that.
Yeah. I mean,
I hate
I
I
adore him.
good.
He was fucking hilarious, but it was a fucking mind trip because we talked about him in the like open panel, and he was so consistent and reasonable. Like he was excellent. And then he came
Hmm.
into a like kind of an after debate in just like my channel, and his positions. I was just like, for those of you who are watching, I'm sure you remember. I was just like literally like, none of this makes how were you like this before and like this now? This doesn't make any sense. But it turns out that people will just like actually. Oh, did you get what you missed with him afterwards? Yes! As soon as the stream ended, his position
Yeah.
was way more reasonable. He's like, oh, it's not that I think all conservatives are bad. I just think, like, the general conservative narrative is really dumb
Grifting.
and wrong. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not, like, yes,
Yeah.
that's not even the same
I
thing.
was I was gonna say to like on one hand like if I was being really cynical I could just call him a grifter. Maybe he is. I don't know. But like on the other hand like and I'm sure you understand as a psychologist as well like right like it is just true that like it is much harder to understand the nuances of and more reasonableness of someone's opinion when there's more people around and it's like a fight scenario, right? When you get people one on one and you can disarm them and you can just really get to the heart of what they believe, most people don't really believe that outrageous thing, right?
Yeah.
It's going to get more outrageous as they're shouting and screaming for time when people are talking over them, right?
Yeah, and they'll
Like
double
just
down
the way
on
it
things
is
that they normally, like,
that they
wouldn't.
normally wouldn't. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the way it would go.
Yep.
Um, but no, yeah, yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question. I don't know if I just, like, went on a tangent, but.
No. I mean, I asked you if you enjoyed it, and you said you did. Which is interesting because I thought I thought you were gonna say you didn't enjoy it because, I would assume. I mean, to be fair, maybe it's because you haven't been on a panel yet that's debating something close to like your like to your what you're trained and educated in. Because historically on Twitch, like anytime any actual professional enters this kind of space
Mhm.
and then the topic turns something that they know about, they end up just pulling their hair out because it's like, no, I actually know about this. Why are you arguing? Like, what are you saying? Right? And I'm sure if you stay in this space long enough, because again, I haven't been streaming for that long and I've never been on these panels myself, but I've observed and been in this space for years and years and years. And seeing how arrogant people can be about things they know absolutely nothing about, and then people will think they have won over you,
Uh-huh.
right? It can be an incredibly frustrating experience.
Well,
Um,
there's an art of like knowing stats and facts, and then there's an
mhm.
art of rhetoric. And like I'm just
Yes,
starting to learn the art of rhetoric because it's
yes,
not something you don't do rhetoric in academia. Like when you have academic
no.
debates, it's all data. It's like who has the most data?
Wait,
I
wait,
have the
wait,
most
wait,
data, I win.
which I'm sorry, I think that's so stupid. I've every time I've watched like debates in universities, I'm like, what a fucking waste of time. What a fucking absolute. This is not a debate. I think the point of a debate club should be to teach you rhetoric. That should be the point.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
And getting
what
people
have
to
you ever
like
seen those? Have you seen those videos of like those Harvard debate clubs where their whole thing is they have to learn to speak as quickly as possible? Have you ever seen that?
no.
Oh, I wonder if I could find this video now. I don't know if I can, but like there's this kind of debate that's done in like Ivy League schools where it's because the point of it is to get as like as you say, to give as much data across as possible. As as long as you speak the data, it counts. So all these people do in these debate club in these spaces is they practice speaking as and getting their written prepared statement out as quickly as possible. And it sounds like fucking gibberish. Because they're just rattling off as many things as they can as quickly as possible. And I'm like, what is the point of this? What is the point? Who benefits from this?
Yeah.
Like, and what is this preparing? What skill does this give you?
Yeah.
Really, like, it's so weird. It was the wackiest thing I've ever seen in my life. And I was like, this is not, I'm sorry, you can't call this a debate. You can't. You just can't.
Yeah.
Like,
and in defense of like people in debate panels that aren't experienced, there's a lot of times like I don't like engaging into appeal to authority, right? So just because I'm like a professional within the mental health field, I don't want people to assume that I'm correct just because of that, because I
no,
can be
of course,
fucking wrong.
yeah.
Because I've
Of
worked
course.
with people who have worked in the field for like a long time, and their empiricism is terrible, right? They don't actually know the data. And the reality is like sometimes there's major gaps within like certain fields of research that they're just like blind to, and just because you have a PhD, it doesn't mean that like you know better. And so like in defense of like lay debaters, basically, sometimes they're more correct than like the academic types, because a lot of times like sometimes some ideas are so stupid only intellectuals can think of it, right? And so when you like listen when you listen to it, they're like going on this, like when you fucking listen to Richard Wolff ever, you're just kind of like, you're like, this is so dumb.
That debate he had with Destiny was one of the most disappointing things I've ever watched ever in my life. I could not believe that like this man could like of all people that I would think would be able to like actually like answer his questions and like define, like give a good definition of like socialism and things like that. I was very disappointed. Also, Spirit Toby, no, I understand that's a joke, but it's no, but that's the irony, is that lawyers actually get taught how to do rhetoric, right? Like it doesn't prepare you for anything. Like he's talking about like the style of debate I was talking about. It doesn't prepare you for shit, because and it actually would make you a bad lawyer, because the whole point of being a lawyer is to be an excellent like at rhetoric, right? That's the point. That's the big skill of being a lawyer, is that they actually teach you rhetoric.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. It's definitely like an art, and that's like, it's one of those things like kind of the argument of like, just because they can out argue you, it doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong, but it might, right? It might, and so you should probably reevaluate, which is why like when I'm like struggling to explain statistics to people, it makes me go, am I wrong about this? Do I think I know the statistics better? Which is potential, right? I have to like go back. That's why I've been like, watching statistic article. Like
I say you do have to be careful of that too, because you also just shouldn't let someone who's a skilled debater just like make you doubt, you know, your knowledge on things too. But I understand what you mean, right? Like you never want to be too arrogant as to assume like, no, I know this for sure. It's always true, right?
And I don't want to like promote that idea in like a Twitch space where like so many people are so resistant to having their ideas changed about everything, where I'm just like, well, just because they proved you wrong doesn't mean you're actually wrong. Like I don't want to promote that too much. So.
No, yeah, it's weird. Oh, switching topics completely, by the way. Because I remember this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about. I know you made the joke that like your husband turned you into a gamer, but I want to, do you like actually play like video games as a hobby? Like what kind of like, because I want to if I recommend a game to you, if that's useful to you or not.
Yeah. So I love survival games, and any game where I can have a pet or a mount, because I'm truly the most like woo gamer girl when it comes to like games that I play. Like Ark was my fucking jam until basically I like got bored. I play like Red Dead a lot because I like just like riding and training horses and just like cycling through horses. And like I don't mind the shoot. Like I also like GTA 5, so I'm not like just a purely like animal person. But usually it's gonna be role playing games. I like some MMOs, but I just like, the problem with gaming is that it's like very much a leisure for me.
Right.
And now that I'm doing work and I'm doing streaming, I barely have time for leisure. And like I try to prioritize, because I'm on the computer now so much, I'm trying to prioritize leisure that's not in front of a computer. So like gym, walking the dog, going and riding, stuff like that. So yeah, but I'm definitely open to game recommendations anytime.
I will say this game, if you end up disliking this game or not finding it interesting, I'll I will cut off my foot. Like that's how sure I am that you will like this game.
Okay.
Okay. You have to play this game. It's my roommate got me. He got me to play it, and it is incredible. It's a game called Disco Elysium. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna write it
And
in our chat. Is it like this? Elysium? Did I spell it right?
uh
Ilysim?
no, it's with an E at the it's an E at the beginning.
Okay.
As a psychometrician, as a psychologist, it will be particularly interesting to you.
Okay.
This is one of the most interesting like games like I've ever played in terms of like the focus of it and how it's played. How do I pitch this game to you? It's like you play at you basically you start the game and you play you play as a like shitty cop who has just gone through like amnesiatic like ego death, right? So basically he's had taking he like got so drunk that not only has he forgotten like who most of his memories, he's forgotten like who he is fundamental, like he doesn't have like the like a personality, right? Basically he's forgotten his personality, and the whole game is focused on like it's all like dialogue with like other characters, and the whole thing you're going through, you're trying to solve this like murder mystery, and while trying to piece back together who you are, how you think, and like the whole time like the different parts, you're getting input from the different parts of your brain that are so you're like I don't know, you're like you're like bravado is telling you one thing about like this how you should react to this, and this how you should do this and things like that. And at first you're kind of playing it and you're realizing like, okay, like I should do what my brain tells me, what my instincts tell me. And then as you go, you start to realize like, oh no, you can't actually really trust what you think the whole time, right? Just like real life as well. You can't always trust your perception, right? And the whole thing is based on like leveling up and like changing like the parts of your like personality and the parts of your and the different parts of your brain, and how you react and respond to things in game changes how your character will speak and react to things, right? Like you like how you play will like mold their like political opinion and mold their like personality and how they will like react to future dialogue and things like that. And it is the writing is the best writing I've ever seen in any video game, period.
Interesting.
And it will be particularly interesting to you like as like a psychologist as well, because it deals with these aspects of like of different parts of like your the brain. It's quite it's kind of like Freudian, which like you know we all know is like you take with a huge grain of salt, but you know it's in a game format, it's fun, right? It's quite Freudian in that sense, where it's like different parts of your like your personality are talking to you. But it's really it's I would highly recommend it. I would think that you really enjoy it, and it's a really good game to play on stream because it's all just like fulfilled with like choices, right? Of like dialogue choices, and like I promise you will have interesting reactions to it that your stream will love for you to see. I've been streaming it whenever I've been playing it, and it's like the game constantly like knocks my socks off with like the way it's written.
Okay.
It's so amazing.
That's cool.
Can
I pause you? I think I'm gonna take like a 2-minute ad break just to try to get that pre-roll ad out of the way for new viewers. And it'll give me a chance to grab water. So yeah, we're gonna just run ads for like 2 minutes, just so you know, and I'll let you know when we're back on.
I'll be RB too. All right, that's good.
I'm just gonna run to the washroom super quick. I think the ads will like end pretty soon. So if you have another like interesting story, I don't know if Skylar's still here. Don't is so. I guess I have to tell an interesting story while I'm wandering around the house. Okay, interesting story from psychology. Let's see. Well, we once had a kiddo. So, there was a riot at this lockdown place that I was in once. So I wasn't actually there, luckily, but I heard all about it because we had two separate staff members go on like, basically like, what's it called when you take like a super 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 long health break. Does Sky also stream? Sky does stream. It's Skylier Rain. I'll put her Twitch in 1 second. You guys can see it. So, anyways, there was a riot at this place I was working at, right? There you go. So there was a riot. What happened was, unsurprisingly, a bunch of children got angry at each other because they're oftentimes angry at each other, and they managed. So this happened after I left the workplace because I was like, fuck this place. So there was a riot. So basically, the way the like facility looked is, I should get like a really easy draw, like a paint.
Oh shit! Sorry.
No idea. No worries. I'm just doing a little like drawing thing.
Oh, sorry. I was responding to my chat. They said they could hear me in my kitchen.
Haha, that's funny. Okay, perfect.
I'm warming up some of my leftover ziti. I'll be right back.
MS Paint never steered anyone wrong. Yeah, but I don't want to have to like switch programs and stuff like that. Continue to use this microphone as abuse. I know.
Sorry, I couldn't guess it.
Oh, I don't want to play a game. Go away. Sketchpad. Let's just try here. Okay. Hopefully I can just draw really easily. Okay. Good. Okay. So the facility that we worked at, it was shaped like this. Okay. It was a big L, and then at the front of the L.
Here.
Hi, welcome back. I'm just showing them some work stuff. So it's shaped like
Go for
this.
it.
This was kind of like the front entry. Okay, so the kiddos couldn't go up here. We had a secure door here, and then we had an extra wing that was attached here. That went like this. This was a classroom. Because ironically enough, there was actually up over here, so there was like a fence here. There's fences everywhere. Why don't you scroll? Oh, it's the opposite. So there was like a fence. Yeah, there was a fence like here, like this, and here. So there's like a gap for like the windows here because they got broken enough that we needed like a little gap to go outside and clean the glass up. There was like a big courtyard here that had like, there was kind of two things, so we could basically go through like this gate here, and they could play b-ball because we went outside like twice a day. That's a basketball hoop. It's a very poorly drawn one. And then this is where the kiddos were. So there was basically like bedrooms. There was a door here. There's a door here. Okay, there was a little room here that had a phone. There was a kitchen here that they weren't allowed in because knives. There was like a big, massive dining table that was always disgusting, no matter how often we cleaned it.
Is it the youth like recovery center you worked in? Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was an airlock door here. Okay, and everything was like locked down, and then they could go outside, and there was basically like a little area for them to hang out in that was outdoors. They hated it. They were forced to go outside like twice a day, and they hated it and fought us every time. There's like a basketball hoop. That's about it. There was like some plants for gardening. There was never gardening that happened here. So anyways, they took the kids outside, and they managed to basically, I'm not really sure how, but they got on top of the building, and they set the building on fire.
Oh my god.
Yeah, so they set the top of the building on fire, and so we split the kids up. So there's usually 10 kids in the facility, and we'd split them up. So we'd have 5 go outside and 5 stay inside. And these fuckers planned it, because when the 5 went outside and lit a fire up there, I don't know where they got matches, I don't know, they must have had a lighter on them, because they are like fully searched before they come in, like
Right.
Not full on searched because basically all of the staff feel that that's unethical. Like
Sure.
we just refuse to do it, but we do like as close as we can. So they like have to fully strip down. We put them in like a hospital gown, and then we
Right.
make them do like jumping jacks. The most like uncomfortable shit that I like
Of course,
ever
yeah.
really wanted to sign up for as like a addictions counselor. Really intense. So anyways, obviously sometimes we had kids like when they were getting arrested, they like knew where they were going because they like been to our facility several times.
Right.
So they do
Right.
stuff like tape things to like underneath like their ball sack and stuff to like
Right.
sneak in shit. So we like had kids like high in the facility one time because a kid had snuck in like 6 pills of like whatever mystery drug and given it to all their
Sure.
friends because that's a really
Oh
good
God.
time. Yeah. So obviously one of them snuck in some sort of
How funny.
like lighter. So on the 5 are outside with 2 staff. So there's only 4 staff on site. So 4 to 10. It's actually terrible. It's not enough. Ideally it's 5 to 10.
Right.
Mystery drug is my favorite drug. Yeah, it's all of their favorite drugs. So the 5 went outside. They started a fire on the top, which was like, so the 2 staff outside are freaking out. So then when one staff
There's
is coming
only
out,
one type of
thanks
meal.
for the subscribers,
Okay.
Toby. I appreciate that. With Prime Gaming, nice. So they like
Oh, yeah.
went out. They went out. So there's only one staff inside, and once there was only one staff inside, the other 5 started. Like, so they basically attacked the staff member. One of them had hidden a fork, and they like stabbed them in the neck with it. And they were just like causing a big riot. They were basically trying to like steal. Like we have like our name tags are the keys. They were trying to like steal the lanyard to like bust out all the kids. They're like planning this great escape, basically. My understanding is basically the 5 kids on top, like the kid who set the fire and stuff, ran away because he just like jumped off the building and ran away. And none of the kids inside were actually able to get away because we do have like this facility over here. And my understanding is that like we just lucked out that day, and like there was staff coming over from the other facility that could just like come and help. But yeah, it was a really big deal. The person who got stabbed obviously like went to the hospital, and they have like they're still on like medical leave. So that's our workplace. And before, luckily when I worked there was no riots, but there was like a riot just before I started, and then there was that riot after I started. It was really terrible. It was a terrible workplace. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely when like burnout happens the most. It's not necessarily because the job's hard, but because the job's hard and like your like management is shit, and your coworkers, maybe aren't that great, and like you're working in like a dirty workplace because people don't give a shit enough to. Yeah.
Dirty assaults would happen. This like lockup room was the worst because there was only 2 ways to get it. My dog bumped me, which was very rude of her. But this is supposed to be a hallway. She just bumped me while I was drawing it. There was like bathrooms here. So say we wanted to like have a kid get locked up, and then there was just like bedrooms all around,
Right.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
10 of them, and then there's 2 bathrooms here. So if we wanted to lock a kid up, we either had to jam them through this tiny, tiny thing, which opened to the front, but then that exposes all these kids potentially to getting out.
Right.
Or we had to take them around. So we'd go this way.
Yeah, that's a
we'd go
terrible design.
This way, and then this way, and then there's like a front desk here, so we'd have to get them around the desk. There's like a little entry thing here. There's an airlock here, so it's like pretty tiny, and then try to get them in through here because the door on this side is bigger. It's like 2 spans wide, whereas on this side it's like not even the width of a proper doorway. It's more narrow than that, and so it's really dangerous trying to like get kids that are resisting into this safe room when they're like don't want to go in. Yeah, it was a fucking horrible workplace. Wouldn't recommend. Government run.
Right.
Yes.
Probably like constantly underfunded and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, undermanaged at least.
Yeah. Speaking of like workplaces as well, I was like, I'm actually at a point in my career where I'm actually trying to transition to a different form of work.
Oh, really?
Because what I've worked in one-on-one support for like years and years, and I'm educated enough to be like a psychological associate, and that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, COVID has created this very weird, very unique problem in the field. With like, because as I'm sure you know, to be a psychological associate or to be a psychologist, you have to have the education, and then you have to have a certain number of supervised hours.
Yes,
right, doing the job.
Stuff. Yeah.
Right, you have to do your practicum. So I have the education. I'm perfectly educationally qualified. but I need to do my supervised hours. Obviously, you get paid like you're basically just doing the job, and somebody like checks your work basically, and
But
then
you
you just
often
keep
have to
doing it.
pay them, is my understanding in a lot of
Yeah.
places. I don't know if that's your experience, but
Wait, sorry. You have to pay like who? What
sometimes
do
you
you
have to
mean?
pay a psychologist to be willing to supervise you, basically.
I've heard of that sometimes, but like I think the way it's generally done is that like you just get a lower salary,
Oh,
like
okay.
that like because then that like when you're being trained, then once your training's done, then they bump you up to the regular salary, which
Yep.
is only fair, right?
Yep.
Because you're taking resources.
Yep.
But it's created this very weird problem in the field where because of COVID, there's a lot of job loss in the field, not loss, but like a lot of people like retired early, um, and things like that. So a lot of clinics and places are suddenly very desperate for more like psychologists and psychological associates to do assessments and to like pick up like on their like clients and things like that. But they're actually so understaffed that none of them want to take someone who requires supervision, because they simultaneously lost all the people who would have been the most qualified to mentor those new people. So I've kind of been stuck like for like quite a while, like applying to all these jobs that all tell me I have very good experience, but that they can't afford to take somebody who needs to be supervised
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
It's a very tough situation to be in for this. It's frustrating,
Yeah.
but like you just gotta keep. I mean, like again, like for a while I thought I was like, okay, am I missing something? Am I not like as qualified as I thought and things like that? But then I had meetings with like Zoom meetings with like other very experienced psychologists that I like make connections with. And I told them my story. I showed them my resume. Like, no, you're perfectly qualified. I think you just need to keep trying. They're like, it sounds like everything's good. Um, Understaffed due to retirement or sickness. My understanding is that most of this is because of early retirement. Because psychology is one of those fields where like because no one's it's one of those fields where because it's like a quite high paying field. Like what happened is that when COVID hit and it caused like us to have a major big adjustment in how we function in the workplace or even what is a workplace.
Yeah.
A lot of the old guard who were planning on retiring in 2 or 3 years anyway, maybe even 5 years, were like, I'll just retire early. I don't want to deal with all this bullshit,
Yeah.
right? Which is fair enough,
Yeah.
right? So that created a huge vacuum. But unfortunately, the vacuum is so huge that they're like, okay, no, we just need people who can hit the ground running. We can't take somebody who needs like help or needs to be supervised, right? Because I need training. I need to be trained in how to actually do assessments, right?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yes.
I assume like you've been a registered psychometrician since before COVID, right?
Well, so just psychometricians can't register. There's actually no
Oh,
professional
that's
body
right. You're
overseeing
saying
it.
that, yeah.
So it's basically
Yeah.
if you get specific training in it, or if you're just working as one and get
Hmm.
on-job training. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's kind of a weird field where like once you get the diploma, you're a psychometrician, even if you
Right.
really never use it.
Right, but I mean, like, what was the process like for you in terms of like getting your first job? Because surely you needed like that's supervisory time too, right?
Well, we do a practicum within the
Mm,
actual diploma that I did. And
right.
so, like, because most psychometrists are trained on site and
Hmm.
they're usually hired for either like workers' compensation board, like doing
Hmm.
like government assessment stuff, or still government, but like jail stuff.
Right.
Um, so usually there's just like a really long, like 6 month training period that they just train you on all their measures and assessments and stuff like that
Gotcha.
for the
Hmm.
job. Just once you have the diploma, they basically like will speed you through some of them, and they'll be a
Hmm.
little bit looser. They'll like some workplaces will just bump you to the testing right away to just make sure that you know how to
Hmm.
do it. In forensic settings, because there's like lots of different risk assessment measures, you're always
Hmm.
going to have to be trained on them. But risk assessment measures are actually really easy to administer. It's the
Right.
interpretation that's more complicated. So you would
Yes.
again
Yeah.
need more on site. Probably with forensics, you were gonna like I haven't worked forensics for psychometry, but probably in forensics, I imagine regardless if you have education, they're probably gonna be extra prudent of like training you on site anyways about like how they want these things
Yeah.
interpreted. And usually you work with a psychologist, right? So you like report
Yes.
your findings to them and then they evaluate them.
Where I'm like specifically looking to get into is like I'm looking to like for schools and like centers that focus on like neurodevelopmental diagnoses and things like that. That's where I'm like kind of because that's where that's where all my experience is, right?
Yeah.
Um, which is great. I remember
Yeah, there's a
I
lot of
even
private companies that do stuff like that get contracted
yeah.
out by like public school
Yep.
systems and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember I remember I even had one I had one psychologist who emailed me back, and it very clearly like a very small clinic, because it was the head of the clinic who was emailing with me and not some like HR person.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Oh, like you have a lot of really good, really relevant experience. Like I'd really like to have you. Are you registered?" And I was like, "No, I'm not." And I explained everything to her, and she was like, this is such a like, only you will get this because you understand like you're around these people like I am. She gave what is one of the most like psychologist like responses I've ever heard in my life, which is like, you know what, my initial feeling is to say no right away because I'm very busy right now and I'm very overwhelmed. I don't think I can take it, but I know I'm gonna be less busy in 2 weeks, so let me get back to you in 2 weeks when I'm in a different mental space and like reconsider it. And I was like, that is like the most emotionally intelligent rejection I've ever gotten in my life.
Yeah.
Like,
That's funny.
just it was really funny to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else that you can think of to kind of chat about?
No, I think we've been chatting for a long. I can't believe, have we been chatting for like 3 hours? I think.
Yeah.
Damn. Yeah. I don't know. I really I knew I wanted to talk to you after I saw you on Destiny because like he's had psychologists on before, but you were like the way you spoke and talked about things. I was like, wow, she has a really good understanding of this field, and you're clearly very thoughtful on things that aren't just psych as well, which is why I wanted to talk to you because I figured we'd be able to have like a good conversation
Yeah.
about things.
Yeah, no, I
It's fun.
appreciated it. It was interesting.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to get your perspective on the autism, especially, just because that's like your
Yeah.
thing.
That's my specialty. Yeah.
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 What all maybe are you gonna keep streaming for a while?
Yeah. I think I'll stream for about. I think I'm gonna play some like Disco Elysium for a bit, and then I'll maybe turn off stream. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna send everyone over to you. I'm gonna probably head off for
Amazing.
tonight because I've gotta
All right.
get
Thank
going.
you.
But for those of you who are watching, just remember I'm gonna be talking tomorrow to Mr. Girl about Dr. K.
Oh,
The big
I'm
drama.
excited. I'm excited to see that. Oh,
Yes,
I was.
big drama.
I'm curious how he's gonna react to you. That's me curious.
Yeah, we've been messaging a little bit. Like I said, I've said multiple times I really like Mr. Girl. So like my biggest
He's an interesting
emotional
guy.
stress about this has been like I kind of want to come away being friends, but I don't know if
Right.
that's gonna happen. So
Right.
yeah. So yeah.
What I watched part of your stream the other day talking about Dr. K. What is your like Cliff Notes version of like how you feel about his existence on Twitch?
There's only one type of eel.
Oof,
Okay.
that's a good question. Thank you, Scarfo, for the subscription. Yeah, I am affiliate now, so if you guys want to subscribe, I appreciate it. The more money and subscriptions I get, the more I can like transition my time towards Twitch and stuff like that. But there's never an expectation. My views on Dr. K are mixed. I actually rewatched session 4. So the last one I did, I thought I had watched it all
with
through
Reckful.
with Reckful,
Mhm.
but I
Yeah.
realized I hadn't. I either had watched it and just literally didn't pay attention, or I'd only watched like the first 10 minutes. I was kind of. That is the one thing that I would say like it made me really uncomfortable and sad was like the extent to like the promising that he gave to Reckful, being like I'm gonna be that person for you. And
Yeah,
here's the thing:
and-
every practitioner fucks up. Every
Yeah,
practitioner
and-
fucks up,
and
and
I
he's
was-
a good practitioner.
Yeah, and I would say if I remember correctly, I seem to remember after that episode came out, I think it was like a few days later, he made a video like saying like I should not have said that. That was like I got wrapped up, I got emotionally invested, and like that was
Right.
it. So I think he's already addressed it.
He
But
has,
yeah, no,
but
you're totally right.
I
Yeah.
felt his addressing wasn't enough, and because of like the connection he had with this is why I said like I made promises like that to my kids before I was even a professional,
Sure.
and I followed them through because you don't
Right.
make promises to people that are like broken like that to such an
Right.
extent. Especially when I watched it, like he really went out of his way to bring it up. Like Reckful wasn't asking for it from him; he wasn't even alluding
Right.
to it. In fact, like Dr. K kind of like was like it was like he was like holding a present behind his back, and then he's like
Right.
surprise! I'm gonna be there
Right.
for you forever. And Reckful's like, wait, really? And he's like, yeah. And Reckful's like, wow, that's amazing, right?
Right,
Like Reckful
yeah.
wasn't even asking about it.
Yeah.
And so I just, yeah, I was really saddened, and then when he took it back, I was like, liability-wise, you have to take it back, but you should
Of
have never
course.
said it. And if you
No, of
did
course
say it,
not,
to
yeah.
be honest, you probably should have adjusted your life to meet that like demand. Like
Mhm.
fundamentally, you probably shouldn't have said it if you couldn't commit to it. But like,
Right.
there's a reason you offered it, and you should have evaluated that. So
Mhm.
yeah, I was really. Oh, bye, Choo Choo Train. Thanks for watching.
But right, but I mean like so I'm sort of asking on a broader scale as well because there's a lot more he's done than just like his
Yes.
like relationship with Reckful, right?
Yeah, outside of that.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
outside that, you're fine with everything?
I think he's like liability wise, he's pretty obviously like violating certain liability things. But I don't
Mhm.
care about liability that much beyond like it's wise to stay under your insurance because then you don't get sued. But I
Right.
don't think it's ethical even.
So you think maybe legally he's been in the wrong, but morally not at all?
Morally, not at all, except for that one little thing he did with Reckful. I actually think
Sure.
that was immoral a little bit.
Okay, no,
Unethical,
I would agree. Yeah.
gray. Because I kind of have three paradigms. I have like um,
No, I get
liability,
it. Yep.
ethics, morality.
Ethic. Yep.
And so for me, liability, pretty obviously, he's like kind of fucked with that. But he
Yeah.
knows he is, and he's doing it anyways because he thinks that there's like actual good that can come from it anyway. So I'm like, you know
Yeah.
what? I don't have a big like I don't care about liability that much beyond like yeah I also don't want to lose my practice
Of
obviously,
course. Yeah.
but I don't view it as like this moral good, like it's like actually kind of a terrible thing because it really hinders like the level of like help you can offer people sometimes. Ethically, I think he's gray because you could argue that like consent and confidentiality, even though the people are consenting to like being on public spaces because he knows he's working with like decently like mentally unwell people, maybe he shouldn't be allowing them to even consent for that. Would basically be like
Right.
ethically he's gray. I'm not. You could
Yeah.
argue.
Yeah.
I could
I
see
would
an
say
argument on either side.
bringing people on stream and having what is essentially public therapy in front of thousands of people is definitely a gray area
Yeah.
for sure. Um, but although I will say just to push back on that idea a bit, I think it would be I think it's pretty unfair, and also like you could also say like pretty like it could be a bit like patronizing to say that the people he has on are so mentally unwell that they can't speak for their own right like well-being, right?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I don't think he's ever had anybody on who has like, like something wrong with enough that you're like, okay, you can't make decisions for yourself,
Yeah, that they're like
right?
psychotic or like
Yeah,
yeah,
of course.
exact. Which is why I'm saying it's
Yeah,
definitely ethically gray. I could
yeah.
see people feeling either way, and to be honest, with where our ethics are at like a professional body level, there
Hmm.
isn't a clear answer. Um,
Yeah,
and so it's kind of like I can see why people have ethical issues with it.
yeah.
I don't actually have a huge issue with what he does broad scale.
Hmm.
I think there's like a couple of weird things with the gamer coaches, but a lot of it is like conjecture because it's hard to figure out all the details on it. So
Right.
overall, I think like Dr. K is probably still a net good.
I
But
would say so too, I
I can
think.
understand some concerns, and I think like the reality is that like I do think that some of the concerns are outweighed by the the good, basically.
Yeah. I think I would generally again I haven't I at this point you probably consume more of his content than I have. Because like I don't like I again I kind of like I consume his content to the extent that it's interesting for me. I don't really find like the need for most of his mental health stuff because I like to think I'm relatively mentally healthy. So like and I've already like introspected a lot and come to the conclusions that he's kind of leading people to.
Yeah.
But my whole thing is like when I see somebody who can, this is why I so highly value someone like Destiny as well, is because when I see someone who can reach this particular demographic of people, where I'm talking like white, like cis, like gamer men,
Yeah.
and get them to like consider like things that are very beneficial to them, or but that this group is traditionally very resistant against. You have to provide me with a lot of evidence to prove that this person is doing bad to the
Yes.
world,
Yep.
right? Which is why again I push back very hard. And somebody who I'm incredibly familiar with is like Destiny, where like that's why I push back all hard on like these like far leftists who say that he's like a fascist, whatever the fuck. Because I'm like, I don't know, man. You're gonna have to provide me something more substantial to prove to me that Destiny's a bad person when he's probably the only one of the biggest reasons why the like Twitch politics space it is no longer like the like skeptic right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like it is incredibly hard to get white cis straight men to like think in like a more empathetic left leaning view.
Right.
And especially to getting in touch with their emotions and like think about their mental health.
Yeah.
Which is where and I think he's explained this before, where I think Dr. K saw the need and why he entered the space the way he did is because he saw that need there. Um, it's like gamers tend to kind of hide everything in their hobby instead of actually dealing with them, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Okay, I'm gonna send everyone over
Okay.
to you. Thanks
Yep.
everyone for tuning in. See you guys
Thank you.
tomorrow at
Thanks for the
6
chat.
p.m.
I had a lot of
Eastern.
fun.
Yeah, and remember when you guys raid, you have to scream trash goblins.
Oh,
Um,
work. Absolutely.
yeah,
Call me a trash goblin. I'm
and I'm
into it.
sending you guys over to Skyler's actual channel, so make sure you stay around just to check that out for like 2 seconds. And I hope everyone has a good night.
Awesome. Thanks so much, by the way. This was great chatting with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I'm gonna let you go. We're not so we don't do infinite goodbyes.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye.